Hello and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network where we reflect on Wildbow's most incomplete work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse,
And I'm Elliot Diebold,
and we are coming to you live,
live.
depending on uh, when you are listening to this. If you're listening to this live, then we're coming to you live. Otherwise, it's just a regular podcast. But yeah, it's worth noting that we are now doing these recordings as live recordings, which means we're going to be talking to chat, interacting with people. There are currently 21 people on the Discord listening to us record this live, and you could be one of them by going to duffmedia.com/Discord. So do it.
Yeah, should be a blast. I can't wait to get both interesting points from chat and also when we do make mistakes now, it'll be in the episode that we get corrected, not the next day.
Yeah, so we won't get so many angry tweets because you keep calling Verona Verona by mistake, which is a real thing that
Oh,
happened
yeah, so many times that's
so many
happened.
times. Anyway, should we jump into the chapter? So
Let's do it.
we're here to talk about Fallout 14.2 and 14.3, starting with 14.2, as is the usual way of doing things. We're in Lucy's head. So Lucy is struggling to keep up the routine after they have lost the battle. She's heading to the shrines to kind of do some maintenance on them and runs into Grandfather and Pipes, who tag along.
Yeah, and something this chapter is sort of really hitting hard from the get go is Lucy basically has like PTSD. And she's always been like the Kenneteer who, from day one, was sort of the most defined by the mystery, like in terms of her relationship with magic. Like
Yeah,
she
yeah,
wanted justice to happen to the people who killed the Carmine Beast,
yeah.
and now they lost. They didn't get that. So like more than either of the other two, she's taking that really hard. She lost John as well. Like she's just in a really bad place emotionally, and the start of this chapter really lets you know it.
Yeah. The thing that I think is really fucked about this is the thread that's running through her head about like thinking about whether she should have tried to kill Charles,
Hmm.
which is obviously so messed up. I mean, we've been thinking about it and like saying, well, it looked like she could have shot Charles, but obviously Mariska probably would have had a plan for that, blah, 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 blah. And like, that's already a kind of messed up thing to think just as an audience member speculating. But obviously, imagine being Lucy in that situation. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
The thought around like, should I have tried to kill this man? Would I have even been able to? Would that have saved my friend from being killed? Would that have saved all the horrifying things that are going to happen now that Charles is in charge? Like,
That's so much to have on
yeah,
your shoulders.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and I mean, this does like kind of speak to one of the things I've really just enjoyed about Pale. Because in Arc 13, Lucy was like the lead voice of like we shouldn't cross any lines. We need to win the right way. We shouldn't win the wrong way. And we saw her sort of start to question that on the night. I think like
yeah.
1311 was her last chapter, and that was
They
the one
really
where she
put their
started.
toe up against that line, didn't they?
Yeah, but she still like she was the one who very adamantly was like, "We need to do this right."
Mm.
And well, they lost, and that was what we talked about when they had that debate. What happens if you lose? And now Lucy has to deal
Yep.
with that. Like
Yeah.
her portion of the fallout is going to intersect with this idea that she wanted to do things right, and that kind of meant that they lost.
Mm.
Maybe it wouldn't have made a difference, but the doubt is there, and that's all that really matters. Um, and that's such a cool thing for the story to like get ready to explore.
Mm.
Like this reminds me of I remember when Arc 8 happened. So after Alexander and Bristow got taken out, and Arc 8 was dealing so much with the aftermath of that fight, and I was like, this is really cool. You don't usually see stories explore this side of the conflict that much, and
Yeah. Especially
Arc
interesting
14 is
because
that on steroids.
yeah, that was a we won, but at what cost? And this is a what did we not do
Yeah,
because we didn't think it was worth doing for this? Like, you're right. It's a very interesting reflection of these same ideas.
yeah, and it's just something so many stories don't tackle because it's a
Mm,
really hard thing to do. So I love that Pale's doing it again, basically.
yeah, yeah. Now we've got to talk about meeting G Pops and Pipes. The thing that really stood out to me, and get this beat hit a few times throughout this chapter, is just how evolved, I guess, is the word I would use. John was like, um, we don't know any other dogs of war. We didn't until now. So I was just, I had just kind of been assuming John was like what they're like, but no, the fact that he left the war for any significant period of time clearly changed what he was like a lot. Like, I'm kind of worried now that these dogs of war would basically just be going around doing extrajudicial killings, if not for the fact that John kind of had the judge rewire their brain a bit to be more friendly, which is
Yeah.
kind of worrying.
Yeah, I mean, because you're right. We got a taste, especially like in the break fights, like when John was doing those fights, for how much he'd grown.
Mm,
But seeing grandfather and Pipes without him, it really hits you even more strongly.
mm.
Um, yeah, I mean, the stuff you mentioned with, yeah, like the Alabaster rewiring their brain. I mean, that's going to be super interesting for tracking them forward because we've talked a lot about like dogs and this inherent ethical dilemma in allowing them to grow because they
Yeah.
grow by taking
Yes.
other people's lives.
Yeah.
And does the Alabasters change? Is that going to make that better? Is it not going to make a difference? Is it going
Was
to
it
make
going to
it
make it
worse
worse?
somehow?
I mean, if
Yeah, I
they
don't.
aren't able to grow, does that mean they're going to be stuck as, baby dogs, puppies?
Yeah, it's gonna be yeah, like I'm really excited to sort of see where they go as a group because
Mm.
yeah, I mean, we can keep pointing them at Alexander types and stuff, I guess, if they need to kill people, but
But
that's not an ideal situation.
yeah, and I don't think it's as blunt as this, like with what they take. But if they only kill monsters, then
Yeah.
inherently they're going to be getting more and more monstrous, right? Like, which is not me advocating for them killing, good and nice people, but something to keep in mind. It's probably not. I don't know. Then maybe
I
on
mean,
the other hand, John was able to grow not by killing, by retiring from the war, right? Hopefully, I don't know. So we'll see.
yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting and that Alabaster twist is just gonna probably be a really fun addition to the dilemma.
Mm,
But yeah, like just sort of putting them next to John again in our heads, like not only are they sort of, less world wise, and they don't have real names, like it's important to remember John's the only one who had a name. None
mm,
of these guys have graduated to that point. They're all sort of titles or things they picked up. But the big thing that really jumped out to me was Lucy, even right till the very end, was usually learning from John. Like I'm thinking of in Arc 13, the two of them spied on Massa for a bit, and I think that
mm.
was when his glasses got broken, the famous broken glasses. Um,
The defining character trait of Massa now.
but like here, Lucy is the mentor for grandfather and Pipes.
Yeah.
Um, and that sort of starts to play into what this chapter really starts to become about for me, which is how alone Lucy is and how she has no one to lean on. But like, I feel like this is why Grandfather and Pipes hurt so much in terms of John. Not only because they keep bringing him up, but also like they remind her of John, but they're not someone she can lean on. They're people who have to lean on her too. It's like the worst case scenario for her, sort of trying to get over him and move forward.
Yeah, yeah. It makes me think of a wider problem that the Kintiers are facing now, which is, at least among the Ken and others, they've lost a lot of their mentors, right?
Yeah,
They have seniority now. Like, they don't have people that they can lean on as much. I mean, they've got Miss and Rook and Toady, I suppose, but John's gone. Guillermo is not in a position where he can be a mentor at the moment, and neither is Matthew. And those were three of the kind of leads in helping to shape them, aside from Miss in the early story. So yeah, they're really the loneliness, or the, I don't know, inability to lean on other senior others in Kennet is definitely growing.
yeah. And just the power as well. Like all the power is now really in Charles and Liz's domain.
Hmm.
Like John, the Hungry Choir. We've also lost the Ken heavy hitters.
Yep.
Um, which this is the other verse, so those two things are intentionally not separate. Um,
Yep.
But yeah, no, I'm so interested in this dynamic of because something I think we used to talk about in Arc 13 is, oh, if this is the end, if and John dies, Lucy can like be the new Yolda for the dogs in the epilogue.
Mm,
And now that the story's ongoing, there's like a really cool, valid reason that that isn't really where we're at yet, because like Lucy's not in a position to care for people right now. What she desperately needs is somebody to care for her.
mm,
And she can't. These guys need active leadership, and she's not really in the position to give that to them right now. So her relationship with the dogs is like way more complicated than I expected, and I can't wait to sort of track that over time.
mm. Yeah, yeah. We'll have to see how she grows into that role, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, Lucy is going by the shrines and first stops by the shrines of Grabsy, Footspur, and Long, as she is teaching the dogs how to pay tribute.
We just got to call out the name Grabsy. Just because in 14.1 last week, Avery noted like, oh, they called Smolder, but my name idea was Fumey. And
Mm.
then the next chapter we meet Grabsy, and it's like, oh, it's good to see Avery did get to
Yeah,
name
we did
some
get
of
to name
them.
one. Yeah.
Because I love that Walbo can do this, like, because it's not just coming up with the spirits and like having his own internal name for them, but like that extra level of detail in the writing that he then like filters that through what the characters would name them.
Mm,
That's just like one of those extra little details that I think would be very easy not to do. Like you just create the spirits in your head and give them the names that like were affiliated with what you thought they were.
mm.
Um,
Yeah.
like Borodor, as like a funny pun joke because that's Spanish for draft, but not draft as in air coming in, but like first draft.
Yes,
Um,
which apparently is intentional, which I think is interesting. Like the name, they kind of messed up the name a bit, I guess.
yeah, but knowing Verona, because they say it was Verona who named it, like
Mm,
100% she did that on purpose.
mm.
Um,
So what's that aspect of Borodor that we? I mean, because I've seen, obviously we see a lot of door stuff this chapter, but
I mean, yeah, what's interesting is because these spirits are concepts. I mean, if you give one a weird name like that, does
it
that
will start feeding
affect
into
the
it. Yeah,
spirit?
yeah, I
Yeah, like
imagine so.
maybe this is an experiment Verona's running, which might need to get a second pass from the ethics board. But
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, I don't know. It's a funny joke, but interested to see if it means something for Borodor, or if there's an aspect to Borodor we haven't really seen yet.
Mm, yeah, keep an eye on it, I suppose. Um, I
I mean, oh, sorry, just before we move on, do you reckon are there any other spirits whose names specifically jump out to you as one Kenneteer named that one?
um, Borodor, Verona, Grabsy, Avery, Footspur. Who do you think named Footspur? That feels like a Verona name to me.
Yeah, it could be Lucy.
Mm.
Dish. I feel like I'm being harsh on Avery, but Dish feels like an Avery one because
Well,
it's just
Dish and Long
she's
are just
Dish.
both very blunt.
Oh, see, but Long, I think Long's actually quite clever because that's a very abstract thing to be represented by a spirit.
Mm,
Like, I think Long would be harder to identify than just she's made out of dishes. She's a dish.
mm.
Yeah.
And she
Whereas
also likes to dish gossip. Is that something? Now,
oh, okay.
we're
So
getting a
we're getting
comment that I do not understand.
yeah, we're getting comments on Dish's name in the chat. I like Megafire's dishing out the hurt. That's fun.
Wabo is pointing out there's an expression, that pretty girl's a dish, which I wasn't
Okay.
aware was a
Yeah, I
slang. There you go.
I've never heard that term before. But yeah,
It
okay. So
seems
it's
old
slang for
school. Yeah.
an attractive person. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I guess that fits into like the concept of dishes as like it's very decorative and sort of
Yeah, true.
something you want to look at. I guess. What about engine head? Is it?
Now that's got a lot of levels of subtlety to it, Elliot.
I'm
But
just
no,
like engine
like,
head sounds like an Avery one to me, right?
but then I've heard the expression gearhead for someone who's like, into cars, right? So maybe there is
Yeah.
another level to it that we're not thinking about. Anyway, um, I really love the chaotic energy of pipes here. Like, again, plays back into just how underdeveloped these dogs are, but Pipes just does some wild stuff in this chapter, like yelling as loud as he can at some of these spirits.
Yeah, like in a way, he isn't operating on that much more mature level than like Grabsy. Like Grabsy comes to steal something and he's just like yelling, "Nice try." Like
Hmm.
it's kind of playing Grabsy's game at the same sort of level. And this is meant to be like a kid spirit. Um so you're right. Like I feel like this moment really sort of solidifies for you how immature Pipes is. I mean his obnoxious loudness comes in handy later. We'll
Mm.
get there, but definitely in this moment, you're like, "Oh, like, these guys are not John."
No, they don't seem to have that intrinsic gut feel for how they should behave in some of these situations yet.
Yeah. In saying that though, like, obviously we see Pipes kind of blow it here with Grabsy. Like, when he yells at him, Grabsy disappears and Lucy's like, "Oh, you'll have to make up for that later." Lucy deserves a lot of credit. She is effortlessly communicating with all of these spirits here. Like, Footspur, there's like a moment where she tries to talk to Footspur and Footspur communicates by like lifting her hand out of a spike and then slapping it back on the spike,
Mm.
and Lucy reads her mood off of that. She communicates with all of them, and I think like traditionally that's always been like Verona's strength. Verona is usually our Kenneteer who, when someone communicates through non-traditional means, Verona's the one who
Well,
gets there instantly. But
yeah,
like Lucy's put in the work and gotten there with these guys.
I think that's playing into a bit. I think Lucy explicitly calls that out, like playing into building the sense of Lucy being isolated. Right? She a few times throughout this chapter will call out like, "Oh, Verona would be great at this," or "Oh, Avery would have been really good at this, but I've got to do it, and I'm just not as good as it at it as them." Yeah, it really helps to lend to the just the tone of Lucy feeling just very isolated.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Like she does that. It's the Kenneteer special at this point, which is thinking how much better the other two are.
Yeah, but it,
Um,
it really lands more when when they're not here. Like often it will be a Kenneteer
yeah,
looking at Avery doing something, being like, "Oh, she's so much better." But it's here. It's more of a, "Oh, I am struggling to cover the bare minimum of this thing that I know Avery would be good at." Like it's not a resentment, but
yeah.
it is like it's a real longing or sadness, another level to the missing your friend, I suppose.
Yeah, and because magically speaking, they awakened as a trio. They sort of are meant to complete each other to an extent. Like when they're apart like this, they're a
Yeah,
little incomplete.
yeah.
And it's sort of exact, or yeah, highlighting that to us. Especially again, as she's the one who's having to carry grandfather and Pipes through all this. Like she's having to be the expert, and I feel like when you have to teach someone like that, you become very aware of the parts that aren't your forte.
Mm.
But I don't know. I really wanted to give Lucy credit, especially like after all of the stuff in early arc 13, where she was having the fights with Verona. And people like there was an emphasis there on how much she wasn't getting Verona's cues, and they weren't communicating well, in part because Lucy didn't sort of realize what she was missing from Verona's end of the communication. And like we saw her sort of step up in that regard at the end of arc 13, and I think we're seeing more evidence of how she's getting better at that here when she's just able to communicate with all these spirits very easily. Like the spirits would do stuff and I'd be like, "What the fuck does that mean?" And Lucy just seemed to easily interpret it.
Mm.
Like yeah, it doesn't come naturally to her, but I think she's doing really well at learning it in the case of all these spirits, and I think that deserves commendation.
Yeah, yeah, she's definitely doing very well. I do like the concept for Footspur as a spirit. By the way, we were talking about the specific and niche spirits, and the spirit of like stepping on a Lego block effectively is a very fun idea for a spirit. Yeah, I think it'll be
Yeah,
very fun to see Footspur in a fight with Charles, and Charles just keeps accidentally stepping on nails or caltrops or whatever. It'll be delightful.
yeah. I love these spirits that are like, I don't know what word I want to use. More abstract, more like high level, advanced concepts. Like it's not, like to keep being harsh on Dish. She's just you point out and be like, oh, that's a dish. She looks like dishes.
You're
Um,
really hitting that hating on dish drum today, huh?
yeah, just like because Dish was the one where I was like, oh, it's really cool that she represents something that's you know not a typical thing that you'd have a spirit
Mm,
of in a lot of things.
mm,
Like she's dishes, but then you get these ones that are even much more like abstract, less concrete ideas. Like Footspur is, yeah, the spirit of stepping on something sharp. Like that's just like a really like high level concept. I wouldn't have thought to make a spirit of that anytime soon. Uh,
Yeah.
and just like seeing the aesthetic, like the shrines they build, like Footspurs is like one of those like traps you set up in the jungle where people fall into the pit of spikes,
Yeah,
which is
a tiger trap is that what it's
crazy.
called? Anyway,
Oh, I
yeah.
can't remember. But again, like talking about shaping the spirits, I wonder how much that's an extremely violent image to build the shrine around. Like, and if that's what's feeding the spirit, how much is that going to work with Footspur? Like, how much does Footspur become a little bit more violence oriented if that's their shrine?
Mm,
Like, they should have built something out of like pokey Lego bits, and maybe Footspur would be more chill.
yeah, yeah. I wonder. It seems like Footspur's not thrilled with them because they keep spawning in these. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. Um,
Yeah, I just think like I love these idea with the spirits. Going back to Borodore's names, I'm so interested to see how much like the Kenneteers are also shaping the spirits as well as like leaning into their
mm,
aesthetics. Like, and this
mm,
is stuff like Lucy is talking about it here. She's like, "Oh, Footspur, can we, do it this way?" And we saw Avery do it with a lot too. Like the Kenneteers are sort of actively trying to shape them a bit. And the other really good example of that is we do stop by Long, and or they have taken the form of a cat,
mm.
or they're very cat-like in their appearance. Which, considering Long was the one who was possessing Verona for a while, definitely feels like we're meant to uh, assume that a bit of Verona ended up back in Long at the end of the day too.
Mm.
I'm unsure if that is because of the whole getting gainsaid while Long was inside her or what, but um,
Or just
yeah, like the
Verona's.
Kenneteers are shaping these spirits.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, Long Cat is a classic meme, so I do suspect that Verona's love of memes has rubbed off on Long very actively here.
sorry, I'm just googling what long cat is. Oh yeah, that thing. Okay.
Mm.
Um, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like the big thing with the spirits for me, and we'll touch on this a bit later when we get to the thing Megafire brought up in their live read as well. But like the the way they're not only boosting the spirits but shaping them is going to say a lot about how things go, and that's gonna be cool.
Yeah. So yeah, Lucy heads to Borodore's shrine and starts to notice that space is being kind of funky.
Yeah, and this has actually been like a little beat that's been brought up multiple times. Like she struggles to find the first shrine,
Mm.
and then some are too close, others are too far away, and
Things aren't
it's
where
like
they're meant to be.
yeah, and it adds this nice little undercurrent of tension throughout this whole section we've been talking about. That like Lucy just keeps being like, "This isn't right," and you're sort of as it keeps stacking up, you keep being like, "Okay, something's about to happen here," and yeah, obviously it does.
Yeah. Turns out it's Liz just making stuff funky. Well, Liz and Charles together, I suppose.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I guess we'll get to that more when we sort of see their cool new home base. But
Yeah.
uh, I wanted to call out again just another bit where I think Lucy does really well. Grandfather sort of keeps asking her questions and bringing up John, and she sort of just forces herself to say, "Hey, can you not bring
Mm,
up John so much? It really hurts."
yeah.
Uh, and it's sort of the one moment where she lets herself communicate with grandfather and Pipes in a way that's sort of like letting them shoulder a bit of burden and not just kind of accepting that she has to like take care of them.
Mm,
Which at the same time highlights just how much she needs someone she can actually properly talk to about this stuff.
mm.
Like Dr. Mona's got some good business coming her way. Um,
Yeah, I'm excited to see how Lucy spins that with practitioner doublespeak to make it not the sussest thing in the world.
I mean, honestly, like what this made me realize, if you were like a practitioner therapist, that would be a
Mm,
dangerous job, but you could make fucking bank.
mm.
Like, if you were a therapist that practitioners could talk to, you could charge a lot because they all need it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely they do. Yeah, I wonder. I reckon you could do okay doing that. Would it be
Y-
dangerous? Inherently,
Yeah.
yes, dealing with practitioners, wouldn't it?
I mean, well, you become a source of getting information on enemies. Like, it's a
Well,
disaster waiting to happen.
theoretically, but you could set up some kind of like if you are openly swearing oaths about like you know uh, not being able to divulge, patient client confidentiality, etc. Right?
Yeah.
Like, if you have public oaths about that you aren't able to break, that will hopefully ward people off of trying to extort information from you.
Yeah, assuming they're not okay with forswearing you in the
Well,
process
true.
is
Yeah,
the
that's a good point. Maybe not.
you'd almost wanna have contingencies, like, if somebody forswears me to get information on you, go to war with them or something. Set yourself up
Mm.
so that it to come after you will also get all of your patients after them or
Yeah,
something.
every client who comes to you has to also kind of lend power to maintaining their own secrets. Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, back to the story.
um, so yeah, we get a bit of thought about like what we find out about Charles and Liz's secret base, which is fun, or not so secret base, and we get a bit more reflection on like it taking a day to get there while you're in Kennet is very weird conceptually, and difficult to execute, which I think is a fun thought. Like Charles has protected Kennet a bit by setting up his base here, but also has made it strange and difficult to come after Charles from Kennet. So inherently, he and Liz are a bit more protected
Yeah, it
from the
seems like a really
Kennetiers.
yeah, it seems like a really broken combo that they've essentially put together.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they're really reinforcing each other in a really powerful way.
Mm,
It's quite scary. I mean, they talk later in this chapter about needing to coordinate with Liz to do stuff, and I really want that to happen soon because I still feel like she was the culprit at the end of Arc 13, where we never got to have that conversation with her. The
mm,
second they captured her, Marisica whisked her away. We sort of can guess at like her motivations from her backstory, but we haven't ever had a conversation with her that wasn't super brief and extremely confrontational. So she hates the Kenneteers the most. She's the one we kind of have heard her side of the story the least.
mm.
Uh, I really hope we get that moment where they try to negotiate with her about the boundaries soon, because I just really need to see this conversation with her. We can understand what her end game looks like. Like, what is she trying to get out of this? Because looking like Ken can't be it.
No, that's all she wanted in life was to be like her hero Ken. Yeah, no,
um,
I agree.
yeah.
We'll have to see.
I mean, yeah. To jump ahead a little bit, obviously, one of the things that did jump out to me is as this undercity is growing. I couldn't help but notice that it is, younger women who are on top of the pecking order, which is Liz's natural form. Like the
Mm,
amongst the inversions is the idea that the Brett type seems to be disappearing from being like the de facto normal, and it's more young women. So that will be interesting. That might be Liz trying to push the Undercity into letting her take a form which is like closer to what she considers her natural state.
very interesting. I wonder if this will have implications for the Bretts that live in town. Like, for example, Brett. Like, is he going to
Yeah.
be more likely to want to leave the town as a result of something like this?
Yeah, I mean, this is where all the that's the other side of what we need to talk to Liz about is how the Undercity. I assume she like represents the Undercity as much as she represents like Kennet. Like, I don't think
Mm,
there's like an anti Liz. So yeah, how much is she intentionally shaping this place? How much is she being affected by it? Because it's a bit more other than human, and she is sort of meant to represent the innocent side of the town.
mm,
Yeah, there's a lot to explore there. Like, is the Undercity coming out partially like her trying to push back on the innocents? Like, because Ken didn't push back, he was like molded by the innocents, and he couldn't really affect them.
mm,
If Liz is actively trying to affect them, is that what sort of causes an Undercity to, or yeah, is the Undercity helping her do that, or is it a result of her doing that, or both? Yeah,
mm. Yeah, yeah. Interesting. I do think we're going to get a lot of. I mean, obviously, Verona's chapter starts to play at this already. The
yeah,
relationship between the Upside Down and Kennet as like a give and take, and what the mechanics of that are going to be, and how that's going to play into some of these conflicts that are coming up.
yeah. But I guess before we fully move on from this section where we're talking about the spirits
Mm,
on the border, I just wanted to bring up like this is the part. I think we've now met like 9 of, I think, the 12 spirits on the boundary.
Hmm.
And I was like, I wanted to try and sit down and think of what the theme of them was. But before I got a chance to do that, read through Megafire's live read on our Discord, and they came up with an answer that I think is way better than anything I would have been able to come up with. Which was tying the spirits on the boundary. They sort of fit into the metaphor for Kennetir as the police of the town,
Mm,
in that so many of these spirits kind of represent stuff you usually don't want around. Like I'm thinking of people, particularly like Lot and Engine Head, like the usual like quote unquote troublemakers, and how Mega pointed out like rather than fight them or whatever, the Kennetiers like made peace with them, got them sort of working for them, with them actually. Like they're feeding them, they're staying in touch, they're helping them grow into healthier versions of what they are. Like it's so much better than just shutting them down when they all invaded the town. They've actually like turned them around
yeah,
and been like
more
grow with us.
rehabilitative.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
there's definitely a few that fit into that. Not all of them, though. Or do all
No,
of them fit in? I mean, I guess they all came from the moments of lots of spirits just kind of running into the town.
yeah, it really speaks to the way the Kennetys handled that situation, which is they didn't just run around killing everyone and trying to
Mm,
destroy them. They're like, become part of this town's sort of foundation, this boundary. I'm seeing there's 16, so we've met about half the spirits. That's interesting.
mm,
But yeah, I guess this just fits into the whole nature of how the Kennetys are like shaping and growing these guys. And obviously, we see Liz is sort of disrupting that part of town, like it's sort of unwinding, and they're growing, you know, uh, further apart slash closer. Like, is that intentional on Liz and Charles's part? And just another thing to check in with them on.
yeah, I'm
Um,
looking forward to our first encounter with the Carmine Exile.
Yeah. If people are a bit confused by this whole metaphor, I don't think I'm explaining it well. So Mega made it make a lot of sense in their live read. So check that out. If you're listening live in the Discord, you can just pop in there right now. But yeah, because people pointing out how does Dish fit into that, and I guess I could see Dish being someone who is like delicate, I guess, and just wouldn't usually like someone who's ripe for being abused by bad police.
Mm,
But instead they're like helping to lift her up alongside the others.
mm. Yeah, what's the guy whose friends who like let his friends die? What's he called?
Yeah, that was Lot. Yeah,
Lot. That's the one that I think really fits into this quite nicely. Like he explicitly, that spirit explicitly kind of felt like a person who would just end up in the prison system and then kind of become a lifelong criminal, right?
yeah.
Um,
And you also have like Engine Head is somebody who causes trouble but respects Lucy because she beat him in a fight. Like that, it's sort of that
mm,
you know toxic machismo sort of thing. Like to stretch it a bit, like Footspur, is just having shit everywhere that hurts people. Like that's maybe not super policey, but it's something you don't usually want in your town. And this is the
mm,
Kennedy is trying to like accept that it's already here and grow it into something that works with the town.
mm. Yeah, I
Um,
like it. I like it
yeah,
as a theory. Good stuff. I have to check that out. So yeah, Lucy heads home, prepares or is back at home, prepares for school, and has a brief convo with her mum, Jasmine.
yeah. Which like Jasmine just deserves a fucking shout out for like managing to switch into mum mode here. Like after
Mm,
Lucy goes and grabs these groceries for her, without prompting. Jasmine, even though she's like dead tired because she worked mostly a night shift, like she's only gotten half her sleep. She manages to like insist that she takes photos of Lucy, like really lean into that excited mum vibe of, oh, we need to get photos of you, um, and stuff. Like it's yeah, what a champion.
yeah, yeah. God, Jasmine's so great. Like my, I really want Jasmine to be more active in the story, but I know that there's not really a great way that that happens. So,
It's the
yeah.
Warbo side character conundrum of I want to see more of this person, but also I don't want to condemn them to being in the story
Yes,
more.
exactly. I know the more in the story they are, the worse it is for them. So, but yeah, I mean, so yeah, explicitly kind of confirming Jasmine isn't like aware, capital A aware or anything.
Yeah,
She's a little bit interested in the phone call that Lucy made, but it's not a doesn't seem to be a like it doesn't seem to be diving in as deeply as some people might have been thinking after summer break.
Yeah, she was just willing to sort of buy it as a weird urban legend, and she just wants to hear more about this weird urban legend. Like, that's definitely within the realm where Lucy can just pass it off as a made up story and
Yeah.
end the conversation.
Yep.
Um,
And she does.
yeah. I mean, I really liked the way Jazz brought this up in part just to thank Lucy for like raising her God, I was gonna say raising her awareness, but obviously that's loaded terminology here.
Her
But
suspicions.
yeah, making her concerned.
Yeah.
Because obviously that was, what set off the whole thing. I mean, what's great about these two is they have this great conversation, and like, Jasmine is able to thank her daughter for like doing that, and that's really cool. But also, like this moment, we talked a lot of last week about how similar these two are, and for both of them in this conversation, I was a bit like, oh god, both of you need someone who's supporting you.
Mm,
Like that's Lucy's theme this entire fucking chapter, but for this snippet with Jazz, like she's forcing herself to wake up even though she hasn't gotten her sleep yet to drive Lucy to school, even though Lucy can bike. Like she's
yeah.
going out of her way to still be Lucy's mom, and I'm like, that's so good, but also like, who's helping you? Like the only person we see doing that is Lucy, who goes out and gets groceries unprompted, and it's like, but like Lucy needs something. Like these two are both just so good at
They're each
helping
other's
other
support
people,
network. Yeah.
yeah, and terrible at helping themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Uh, so yeah, Lucy arrives at school and finds out that a number of kids just aren't coming back. Kenneth is already starting to be removed from the lives of regular folks, including, tragically, everyone's favorite character who we all loved, Emerson. Oh no, Emerson. Oh
Yeah,
no.
how will we manage without Emerson?
Yeah.
Um, I there's that fun moment where Mia is like, "Oh, I'm like heartbroken that people like Emerson had to leave," and even Lucy sort of like, she doesn't
She
seem
doesn't look that
that
heartbroken.
heartbroken.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that was.
there's room for doubt as to whether Lucy just can't quite read Mia yet or whatever. But I do like to think that partially Mia's a bit like, for some of them, Mia's like, okay, well,
Mm,
shame.
yeah.
Um, yeah, there was I feel like the genuine part of Mia's heartbreak was about Amadeus just responding to the chat there. I do like that Sleeping Beluga has pointed out that the people who should be supporting Lucy and Jasmine are the father figure in the family, which obviously Lucy's track record with father figures is pretty abysmal.
Mm. Yeah. Um, but yeah, it's fun seeing the school and the fallout that we're getting here in this chapter.
Yeah. I love seeing how it looks to innocence. Like there's some construction happening on the freeway which has made Kennet super difficult to get into and out of, which is just like, these poor spirits having to work overtime to suddenly just make it so that there's construction or something. Like
To
um
keep up with the bullshit that's going on in Kennet.
yeah, but, like, I love how, like, that's just our example of how the world and, like, the seal, like, smooths over the shit that's happening in the magical world so that innocents just don't really like, this'll be a thing now. If Kennet dies, everyone's gonna be like, "Well, it was that construction on the freeway, everyone had to move." Like, you can see how, towns can get wiped off the map in these stories, and innocents will just sort of buy that there was a reason it happened.
Mm, yeah, yeah. It's kind of fun. Again, it takes us
Yeah.
back to that fun dramatic irony of we know things that the innocents don't. It's just a fun setup.
Yeah. And as we get into the class, I wanted to give a special shout out to Wallace because Mr. Sitton, the racist teacher, is their homeroom teacher again, and he's just sort of blatantly, but just subtly enough that you can't call it out,
Mm.
like shitty to Lucy. And Lucy brings
Yeah.
it up to her friends, and Wallace is like, "Hey, I'll listen out for that."
Isn't he like
Which,
every person that he says hi to? He pulls out like oh, this thing that you've done is cool, or like congratulations on this thing, and then for Lucy, he just kind of doesn't.
oh yeah, for everyone, he's like, "Oh, the smart student, oh, the good person," and he's like, "Oh, hey, Lucy, welcome back." It's like,
Yeah,
oh,
so
wait,
it's
yeah.
Jeremy Clifford, the talented artist. Always a pleasure to have a top student back, Wallace. Oh, Mia, congratulations, blah blah. Oh, Miss Ellingson, how are you? Like it's such
Yeah,
a clear like whiff.
but you can't quite call it out, like, it sits right in that zone that has just
Yeah.
driven Lucy mad her whole life,
Oh
where,
yeah.
like, if you attack someone for that, it's very easy to make you look like the bad guy, and I
Well,
just love that when
it's an
Lucy brings
incident that feels like nothing by itself, but is clearly part of a wider
exactly,
pattern, and that's the thing that's hard to
yeah.
call out.
yeah, to the Verona's dad situation as well.
Yeah.
So I just really liked like full Lucy that moment where Wallace is just like, I'll listen out for it. Like that is
Mm.
exactly what she needed from bringing that up with her friends.
Yeah.
Um, as an aside as well, Jeremy's here and Mia sort of gets a bit teasy about him and Verona, and he sort of very clearly lays down, no, Verona and I are just friends. Just Wallace and Jeremy continuing to bat 1,000. Like the Kenneteers really can pick 'em.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so and we start to hear about how everyone's leaving, and Lucy actually kind of suggests that maybe Wallace should leave, which I feel like is a really interesting ethical dilemma that is going to start being put in front of the Kenneteers. Do you? Because if
Mm.
you push the good people out of town,
Yeah.
you're doing them a favor, but you're also pushing all the good people out of town.
Well, yeah. I mean, it comes down to the question of is Kennet salvageable, right? Like,
Or even then, even if it is, it's like if it's gonna be really rough on them, like, there's an
mm,
argument for pushing them away, like getting them out, while you try to fix it.
mm, I don't know. What would you do, Elliot?
See, I feel like I'd be inclined to push them all away, and
Mm,
then it would blow up in my face.
yep, totally.
Wait, what about you?
Yeah, I think I would. I'd let it be for now. I think I, we don't know what the equilibrium of this scenario is going to be yet, or like even if this is an equilibrium right now. Like, I would let it be at least for a few more weeks. I think
Yeah, yeah, that's fair.
not enough info to answer the question accurately.
Yeah, I mean, I get the impression that all the paths are quite bad and gonna be rough at the moment, but yeah,
Having said that, it's probably easier to get out of Kennet now than it will be when it gets more knotted. So there is a bit of a time
true.
pressure on it.
Yeah, yeah, good point. One of the other things I just quickly wanted to call out, this hilarious bit of foreshadowing. The As Lucy is entering the school, one of the teachers is out front asking for the grade 1 students to come inside, and I'm sitting here thinking, who's after the grade 1 students? Because isn't their teacher
Yeah,
not in this
drunk.
world right now?
Yeah, yeah, that's fun. Maybe it's the fact that the grade one students are being rowdy is because their teacher is AWOL.
Yeah, true, true.
Um, the other thing that I'm excited for now is Melissa. What is going to happen with
Yeah,
Melissa? Like Melissa is a character where like we left her in a point before arc 13 where that could have been the end of what we saw of her. Like her arc isn't concluded, but she definitely had a few enough beats that we could kind of see where she was going.
yeah. Oh,
But now we have the
she was one of
story
those.
again. Mm,
Sorry, I was just gonna say she was one of those threads where it was like, okay, like this is one where when she didn't grow fully and become like a focus, because Arc 13 was happening, it was like, okay, we can touch on her in an epilogue or whatever, but she doesn't
yeah.
need to be pivotal to the end of the story. Whereas, yeah, now as we're entering the second half, it's sort of like, like Melissa is one of those threads where I'm like, oh, okay, this is probably going to start to get a lot more
Yeah.
attention. Like
There's
the wolf is
time
another
for her
one.
again now. And I'm excited
Yeah.
to see what happens in that time. Like, will Melissa become the new Avery? Maybe.
The third Kenneteer, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, she's sort of our biggest, most aware person. Lucy is still sort of they've kind of given up on trying to stop her from being aware. I know that was a decision they made ages ago, but
Yeah.
it's worth remembering where Lucy's like, probably shouldn't tell you, and Melissa's like, I want to know, and she's like, okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, because she's gonna kind of be the Kenneteer's responsibility in a very dangerous place. That will be
Mm.
interesting. Yeah, yeah, all these threads, yeah, like Melissa and the Wolf and all that stuff. I can't wait to get to explore them more now.
Melissa and the Wolf is a great band name, by the way. Um,
Could I just want to call out the moment Melissa enters the classroom. Like we talked about
mm.
Mr. Sitton's entrances because it's like Mr. Sitton, she walks in and Mr. Sitton says, Melissa Oakham, congratulations on the wavy tree win. And she just goes, pretty obviously not in dance or gymnastics anymore, Melissa said, stamping her cane. And it was just like such a strong Melissa entrance. I was like, oh, yep, that's her. She's
Yep.
back.
Classic Melissa. Love it.
And she even starts to feel bad for Lucy. Like she has that moment where she jokes to Lucy, like, oh, why couldn't you just win? And Lucy almost breaks down because, again,
Mm.
PTSD.
And yeah, she's
Um,
been running that question through her head since.
yeah. Uh, and like, Melissa starts to like realize she said something wrong and like look sympathetic, and I was like, Lucy, come on, you know your shit's bad if Melissa is being like pitying you and feeling sympathetic towards you. Like you need help.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully Melissa will be just the help she needs. Yeah, maybe optimistic. We'll see. Um, so yeah, we jump forward to a Kennet Council meeting, and there are a number of notable absences. Obviously, Avery and Verona are absent, and like Liz and Charles and stuff. Duh. But
Yeah.
also Guillaume is not here. Where is Guillaume?
Yeah.
Is Guillaume okay? What's going on?
Like Avery brought him up in 14.1 and said he's in winter now.
Mm,
So we know he's in winter, but yeah, why isn't he here? Like Winterfairy can still be on the council. Like I don't know, I'm still mad at him for how little he ended up fucking mattering in Arc 13. Like
mm.
get
Yeah,
out
he
here
just
and
kind of
help your
kept the
coot.
witch hunters away. He didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, which isn't nothing, I
No,
suppose.
of
Like that's a
course,
whole
but
job, but we were all ready for that secret Guillermo plan to unfurl, and he just kind of fell flat.
yeah,
So yeah, he's someone I can't wait to check in with.
yeah. And also, I'm very much dreading it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like I'm sitting here yelling at him for being an unhelpful old codger, but I'm sure I will come to regret saying harsh things like that when I see like what he's become.
Mm,
Uh, but the big thing from this meeting, really, that they talk about is like Liz and Charles are sort of actively not harming Kenneth. Like what we're seeing here is the them holding back version of what's happening here.
yeah,
Like Liz is actually actively dampening the effects of the knotting, which is like
yeah,
that's crazy because this shit's gotten real bad in a week. And yeah, it's just setting up this really fun dynamic of like Charles and Liz are very kind of explicitly allowing Kenneth and particularly the Kenneth others and practitioners to kind of just continue doing what they want to do. Like Charles and Liz aren't actively pursuing them in any way, but there's very much this underlying threat of like, if you mess with us, that can change. So it sets up this super interesting dynamic of now, if Kenneth wants to make a move against Liz and Charles, like they have to be ready to go because like Liz and Charles are actively helping them essentially at this point.
yeah.
Um,
To me, it's Charles and Liz attempting to legitimize themselves a bit before hell rains down upon Kenneth from Muss's peeps. Like
yeah,
if Charles and Liz can present enough of a case of we're not that bad, then Kenneth will be forced to, or Kenneth will be more likely to step in and defend Liz and Charles as they're defending Kenneth, rather than just kind of hoping to point
yeah,
Muss's friends at Liz and Charles, right? And it's kind of
yeah. And I mean,
working. I feel like I don't know, like obviously Lucy's not thrilled about Liz and Charles being in charge, but
I'd
uh,
pick them over Massa and Co. Like,
yeah, like that, it really feels like they're managing to just keep the sword of Damocles dangling and not falling.
yeah, like they, as much as we hate them and everything they've done, they still represent someone I'd team up with to fight Massa. Like, and
Mm,
that's they want to walk that line. Like, yeah, they're keeping the town in a position where they're like, hey, you're not our enemies. You can keep doing what you're doing, but also don't become our enemies.
mm,
Um, and that's yeah, like such a fun thing. Like if the story from here is going to try and be about trying to end Charles's reign because he's toxic, like something to keep in mind is he's around, he can sort of hear everything in his domain. They're operating right near the center of it, and he's currently essentially protecting them as much as they hate him. So how can
yeah,
you move against someone like that?
yeah. Especially when there's a bigger enemy right at the gates. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah.
Um, Lucy is obviously worried about Verona here for fair reasons, and I want us to keep that in mind because, like, when we do Verona's chapter, Verona, I don't know, she's so good at deluding herself that she's got me too. I think, like, she feels very in her element next chapter, and apart from the very end where we see kind of, I guess, a bit of an indication of why that is, and it makes it take a bit more of an insidious tone. It's eerily fine.
Yeah, yeah, well, I guess let's save that for next chapter as well
Mm,
because I'm my I guess my takeaway from the two chapters was I understand why Lucy is very worried about Verona. I am too in my
yes.
own ways, but um I think Lucy should be a lot more worried about Lucy.
Mm,
She has a number of borderline panic attacks in this chapter. Like she closes the fridge and flashes back to like John and the
the door,
alabaster,
yeah.
like closing the door. Like she's on the verge of a breakdown,
Yeah.
and worrying about Verona is just not something she needs to be doing right now. She like yeah, to jump ahead a little bit, Verona actually has a much more active and better support network than Lucy right now. I feel like
That's true.
you're like in terms of people we need to be worried about, I think Lucy actually needs to be higher on the
Tops
list.
the list, yeah.
Um,
I think I agree with that. Yeah, I do agree with that. Although Lucy, the problem with that is Lucy's a lot better at showing when she needs help. You know what I mean? Like,
but yeah, I mean, but she
yeah.
actively rebuffs everyone who tries to
Well,
do it in this
yes, true.
chapter. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I mean, maybe trying to say who's the most concerning is like a trap we're falling into because they're all different flavors of in trouble.
Yeah.
Um,
Except every's having a great time.
yeah, yep, she's all off on her own, which is exactly what she needs to be doing. Um, no, she's got Snowdrop. But yeah, there's something I just wanted to call out as a last thing from this meeting is they start to talk about the knotting and like the fact that there's some sort of undercity-ish thing sort of coming up.
Mm.
And Lucy, when Miss explains that she explained this to Verona, that's when Lucy is sort of like, "Wait, is that why Verona's not coming to school this afternoon? She's like fucked off to investigate the knotting on the first day of school." And Miss is like, "No, it was not my intention that she jumped straight into that, but I imagine it's possible." And I
Come on,
read that
miss.
and I was like, "Yeah, Miss, you're smarter than that. Like, you're so full of shit." Like, this is the woman who in chapter 1.8 Verona was like, "I want to become an other. Are you going to stop me?" And Miss was like, "Nope." And I think that could partially be because Miss is very anti-imposing situations and labels on people.
Mm.
Like, just a bit of that's just her whole vibe. But I just couldn't believe that she was like, "Oh, hey, Verona, there's an undercity here and there's an innocent in there, but you should go to school." Like, just
No, almost certainly she didn't. Right.
like it
Um,
wasn't her intention that Verona jumped straight into that, but she certainly wasn't doing anything to stop Verona doing it.
yeah, yeah. Saying it wasn't her intention feels a bit like doublespeak to me. Like she probably
Yeah.
knew it was going to happen.
Yeah, she just was, telling like, yeah, she knew it was a consequence, but she wasn't like trying to make it happen,
Yeah,
is the vibe I
exactly.
get.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is someone, since we really focused on the fact that, she let the Carmine Beast die, and we've always had this thing sit in the back of our heads of she brought these 13-year-olds into this world. It's interesting to continue to see like in the first few arcs, Miss very much stood as like this beacon of like running the town, and she was our hope. Like we were so excited when she came back in arc 9, and I think as we and the Kenneteers have grown, there's a bit more reason to question her as this person who's perfect. You know, which I guess is part of a story of growing up, right? Like when you're a little kid, you have this tendency to view your parents as like,
Mm,
you know, they know
infallible.
everything,
Yeah.
and yeah, and stuff. And part of growing up is realizing that's not who they are. And I feel like in this story, that Miss is one of the people we're going through that with.
Mm, yeah, interesting. Yeah, yeah. It'll be interesting to see Miss and Rook's, greater plans playing out now that stage 1 has been lost.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, we got a question from Sleeping Beluga, but I want to get to it a little bit later when we talk about the Verona stuff because this is what we're going to be talking about next chapter.
yeah,
So yeah, to round out this chapter, Lucy heads off to school, rounding out the chapter, and she talks to Matthew as she goes, and Matthew is not doing so well. Speaking of people to be worried about, Matthew probably tops
yeah,
Lucy on this list for me.
yeah. Matt's making Verona's home life look pleasant.
Yeah.
Eh, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like this just
It's fucked. It's absolutely fucked. Like the I guess I'm not surprised that rather than sentence Edith to death, they freed her. But like this was not the right way to do it, right? Like Edith is in full on villain mode now. Like she's literally kind of haunting Matthew effectively. It's so fucked.
Yeah, like this is one of those situations where everyone else in this conversation is like, "Hey, Matthew, get the fuck out of that house." And he's coming up with reasons why he can't sort of do that. And that part definitely reminded me of, like, conversations with Verona about living with her dad, where,
Mm,
everyone's like, "Hey, Verona, don't do this," and she sort of, like, has to, and I don't think Matt's excuses hold up quite as well as some of Verona's do, but, oh, yeah, like, it just hurts to learn that it his reward for not being a monster and, like, wishing for her to be unmade is he has to share this house with her, and, like, it's those little details, like talking about how he goes to the fridge to get a beer and she's just in the room.
mm,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I actually, there was someone. I know I'm trying to like obfuscate details here to not like sell them out. I knew someone who wasn't in a super different situation to this. Like they lived in Hong Kong, and so like real estate is very difficult to get there. So they and their long term girlfriend had an apartment together. They broke up, but they both needed to keep living there because they
mm,
couldn't get anywhere else. The thing was the the guy's girlfriend didn't actually want to break up. She wanted to have kids, he wasn't ready, so they broke up because of that. But she still wanted him, so like whenever he tried to bring a new girlfriend back, she like would sabotage the
mm.
situation. So anyway, after about 2 years of that, they got back together and now
Two
they're married and
years.
yep, and trying to have kids. And it really just feels like he basically got held hostage until he got back together with her. And I'm just looking at this situation with Matthew and I'm like, this is just an even worse version of this. And I'm fucking terrified that Matthew
Is gonna
might,
get sucked back in.
yeah, like if it goes
Yeah.
on for long enough, like he might just sort of give in and get broken down by this because it's easier. And she has that precedent of having control over him.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no way it ends well here. Like, yeah, it's rough.
Some quantum hacker in the chat has suggested Matthew should just move into the reflection of his house in the Undercity,
Mm,
which is actually probably safer.
yeah,
Um,
not a bad
I think
idea.
it's a it's a really good idea. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like when I first read this chapter, I was really comparing Matthew to Lucy here. Sorry, I was really comparing Matthew to Verona in like he had a bad
Mm,
living situation and he needed help. But now having read the Verona chapter, I actually think in my head he's sitting a lot closer to Lucy right now. In that, the thing that jumps out to me from talking to him here, he has no one he can lean on. Like he's living with Edith. He doesn't have anyone he can reach out to for help. When Lucy tries to offer, he basically rebuffs her. The same thing's going the other way too. Like Lucy and Matt have this conversation, and they're just both people who are in really bad spots, desperately need help, and don't really feel like they can accept it from any of the people in their life.
I think there's only one that Matthew can lean on, and it's the Doom. And he's just got to. Here's what he's got to do. Okay. Here's my advice to you, Matthew. You say to Edith, "Hey Edith, I'm going to start doing a new thing where every night I let the Doom out for 30 minutes. And if you're here, I mean, not my job, not my prob,
It's
basically."
like that Bart Simpson thing where it's like, I'm just
Yeah,
gonna stand here and whirl my arms around, and if they hit you,
exactly.
it's your own fault.
Um,
Um,
so Edith, you've got to be at least 30 minutes Doom travel away, and it's effectively a restraining order. I mean,
um,
genuinely, I think that's what Matthew needs. So I don't know what the consequences of letting the Doom run free for 30 minutes every day would be, but one of the consequences would be Edith would hopefully get the fuck out of Dodge.
yeah, although it's interesting, he does bring up that she surrounded herself with a lot of the spirits and echoes that came into town under her reign,
Yeah.
as a presumed defense.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Uh,
again, not great that she's just kind of building an army, right? Like,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because on the one hand, him just sicking the doom on her is kind of like, well, you may as well have unmade her because that's what the doom is going to try and do.
well,
But then
yes,
on
I
the other
agree
hand,
with that too. So,
but I like your idea of just saying, "Hey, listen, this is my house. I'm going to let it go for half an hour," because it's very much the sort of thing Liz did to the Kenneteers, or it's like, "I'm not going to hurt you, but if you like stay here, you're hurting yourself." Like it's slightly more ethically okay. In most situations, I'm not okay with that sort of logic, but in Matthews, I'd be okay with it.
yeah. No, people are calling out that correctly. There are reasons why Matthew can't
Yeah.
just do this. But I want to dream, Let me dream.
Uh, something else actually we should call out about Matthew. Like he, as Guillermet has disappeared, Matthew is back as like top brass in Kennet
Mm,
is the term that Lucy uses here, and that just jumped out to me because obviously for most of like arcs 12 and 13, Matt took a very backseat position in the town as he dealt with the fact that the last 10 years of his life had been a lie.
mm,
Um, and it's interesting that now he's arguably in a worse situation, but he has gotten to the point where he's willing to sort of be, back as a prominent member of the council. And I guess sitting beside that is the knowledge that, the doom is presumably fading. And as it does, and he potentially has the option to refill his body with healthier spirits or whatever. Like he's in this zone now where he's going to start to become more practitioner. I expect.
mm,
Um, and that's interesting because he's effectively been an other for the last 10 years of his life. And as he
mm.
gives Lucy practitioner advice here, it started to get me thinking: if he becomes more of a practitioner again, what does that mean for his relationship with the town?
Yeah, a good question. Who knows?
So yeah, I feel like I'm saying this about everything that comes up in these 3 chapters of Arc 14 so far, but just another thread I'm excited to see where it goes. Like
Yes, a lot of
with
fun
Matthew, he's
threads being set back up in these chapters, huh?
Yeah, because Matthew's not just dealing with the Edith stuff. As the doom dissipates, I mean, he's got this hole in him that Edith took up that he has, like like speaking of like metaphors, like he's having to rebuild himself with these missing parts that were being taken up by Edith, and who does he turn himself into as he's trying to get over her, I guess.
Mm,
Uh, and yeah, how can he do that with her right there?
yeah.
I suppose that is a part where he sort of sits next to Verona a bit. 'Cause, that is something Verona's about to be going through too, is figuring out how to build herself.
Yep, literally. Yeah. Should we get into the Verona? Should we get into Verona? Verona's whole thing?
Yeah. Although I guess as the segue, the Lucy chapter kind of ends with Lucy running into this person she thinks is Verona, and then she realizes it's not.
Yes.
And I'm like, so that's the body double, right? Because
Surely,
we talked,
surely.
yeah, we get info on how it's worse at tricking people who like know you better, and so it
Yeah.
kind of tracks that. As much as they've had troubles in the last month or so, Lucy and Verona are so tight that like Lucy just reads this as not even Verona.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is nice. Reassuring.
Yeah, it's mixed into the horror of the fact that Verona is doing this and how
Yeah.
disconnected they are. It's nice that they're still technically so close that Lucy doesn't even really recognize it properly as Verona.
Yeah. So let's talk about Verona, shall we? Verona goes to school and finally fits in amongst all the chaos and brutality.
That's a little
That's the
unfair.
summary of this chapter, I think.
I yeah, I don't think that's completely fair, but definitely, I mean, the theme of the chapter is Verona is very at home in the Undercity,
Well, yeah, I mean, like
relatively speaking.
this to me is something that we were kind of worried about earlier on that faded away a little bit and it has now splashed back onto the story in a major way. Is Verona putting aside her humanity, right? Like that thread fully is back in full force here to me.
Uh, yeah, yeah. I mean, absolutely.
Again, not passing any judgment on that at this point because like Verona does seem, is happy the right word? I guess happy in this school slash prison slash hell. Like, um,
I mean, this is what we're going to kind of be, I think, talking about through a lot of the chapter because it's. I think there are reasons to be concerned, but there are also reasons to not
yeah,
be.
yeah,
Like the thing, like just as we start to get into the Undercity, the big thing that sort of jumped out to me about its whole vibe is obviously there's a lot of openly bad stuff here, like a lot of the violence and the brutality.
yeah,
Um, but like Verona is very good at like focusing on the parts that aren't that bad, like all the artistic expression and eh, like the violence and stuff is more overt in this Undercity, but this whole fucking story has been about how not okay the the upper side is either. So it's like there's pros and cons to the Undercity and the
yeah.
the Overcity.
And to kind of extend that analogy out a bit more, I feel like all of the practice is that, right? Like all of the practice
Yeah.
is there are violent, horrifying facets to it, but also interesting and soulful and nice facets to it. Like
Yeah.
every is a finder. The paths are that to
Yeah,
a
yeah,
T, right? Like this almost feels like a path in the way it's so brutally violent, but also kind of has its rules that you can abide by to succeed in it, right? Um,
yeah,
and we don't hate on Avery for wanting to be a finder, despite the fact that that is gravitating towards things that are incredibly dangerous and violent and horrifying.
yeah. I don't
Um,
hate on her for it, but I definitely sit here with a confused look on my face as she's like,
yeah, I
let's
want to
go
go
to,
do more things like the wolf.
yeah.
That was the entry
I
level,
get
and I
it.
loved it. Yeah.
I get it, but yeah, there's part like I just remember in Arc 4 when she read out like those lists of other paths because I recently reread this for some of that like Mario Maker level stuff for all packed up too. And like
Mm,
reading the description of when she was like, hey, maybe we could take this path to get back to Kennet from the Blue Heron Institute. It's like it was the one where it was a bunch it's like a labyrinth on the back of a giant purple monster. And
mm,
if you open the wrong door, things will kill you, but you can't actually die, so you sit there with a broken back for all eternity and you can
yeah,
like
good times.
negotiate with the other people who are sitting there for all eternity for information on how to get out of the maze and like just like she's like reading this and like just as I was rereading this again a couple of weeks ago, I was like, Avery, you're fucking insane. Why do you want to go there?
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, let's talk about this school, shall we? Because
Yeah,
I think the opening to this chapter, before you really know what's going on, is very fun. Like,
yeah.
because we've been talking about Lucy thinks about, oh, Verona's not coming back to school, what's going on? And then Verona's chapter starts with her going to school, and you're like, oh, okay. And then obviously pretty quickly it becomes clear that something fucked is going on. She's stumbled into some kind of hell school. And I just the moments between thinking, oh, Verona's going back to school, that's nice, and oh, what the fuck is this, are just very delightful moments.
Yeah, and because there's even a few things where like you see kids being crazy, like there's talk about all the rough housing,
Yeah.
and you're like, this is odd, but is this just the
Yeah,
nodding?
is this
Like,
just like kids are being a little bit more violent because of karma and
yeah.
stuff, or
And so you're like, you've got this unease happening where you're like, something's off, but I don't quite know what it is. And then as it like keeps getting worse, and you realize we're in the Undercity, there's this moment of,
yeah, good
Verona
stuff.
is not at school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love this Undercity so much. The this weird mix of like it's got all those things I really love in like post-apocalyptic stuff. Like, we get the stuck arounds. Like I'm always a fan of post-apocalypses where there's terms for weird groups of people. Um but like the vibe as well of like it reminded me the school especially reminded me. Do you remember that old show Recess?
Yep.
Yeah, because it had the kindergartners in that were like a weird tribe of I don't know what word I want to use, like just monsters. And it just reminded me of that, like this whole vibe of like this is a school, but there's like kindergartners dressed up in war paint running around with sticks and stuff. Like it's such a fun spin on like a weird post apocalypse vibe. I was so into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's also got kind of I guess like Logan's Run or any of these other places where like the adults are gone and the kids have now got their own kind of, or like Lord of the
Yeah,
Flies, right? Like
yeah, yeah.
the kids are running the madhouse kind of vibes.
Yeah, yeah, Lord of the Flies is exactly the
Lord
one
of
I
the
was looking
Fries
for, yeah.
too, if you're after a delicious burger and fries.
Um,
For context, there's a Australian fast food chain. It's just Australian, right? I mean, it was started in Melbourne, I think, called Lord of the
I
Fries. They make really good. It's all uh, at least
vegetarian.
vegetarian, if not vegan. So it's pretty nice stuff.
I swear the last time I went there, I got something covered in cheese, but maybe it was a vegan
No,
cheese. I
no,
don't
fake,
actually remember.
fake cheese, man. It's all. Oh no, is it? It's definitely at least vegetarian. It might be
Yeah,
all vegan as well. I
it's
can't
definitely
remember.
vegetarian. I don't remember if it was vegan.
Yeah.
Anyway,
No, I think they have
um,
actual cheese, so it might just be veggie.
but yeah, no, like, just go back, like the vibes of this Undercity as well. Like what I love about it too is there is a bit of a like Alice in Wonderland-ish vibe to some of it. Like I'm particularly thinking of the Mad Tea Party scene.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
and because I know that Alice in Wonderland is usually the domain of path related stuff. Like
Yeah.
that's the Avery thing, but that's like Alice's journey as a whole. Whereas I think that one part, like the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, is absolutely the part of Alice in Wonderland where I think you'd want Verona in charge. because it's much more about like the social kind of topsy turviness,
Mm.
and that's always been Verona's forte, and that's kind of what this whole Undercity is like a bunch of social systems being completely turned on their heads, and she's just so at home in it, like with all these people just saying and doing wacky things, and Verona is just able to barely bat an eyelash at it.
Yeah. Um, yeah, she really just rolls with it, doesn't she? Um, Now, the one marker of Verona being unwell is this injured hand, right? And I obviously I think this is a wonderful device throughout this chapter because sometimes it just comes up, semi randomly, but a lot of the times it comes up when Verona is explicitly thinking about, them having lost the battle or whatever, right? For obvious reasons, because that's where her hand got injured. So
Yeah.
it is like a physical marker that she's carrying around with her of like pain and trauma. And I just love it as a way to remind us as the audience of like, no, 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 don't trust Verona seeming fine because she bottles very hard and things are probably not so bueno for Verona.
Yeah, it's becoming this really good little symbol of like how she's coping with the aftermath of that, and kind of just how she handles her problems. Like I love all these moments. She sort of constantly needs to rub it for it to like feel better,
Mm,
and for it to stop clawing up.
yeah,
But whenever somebody is around, she forces herself to stop doing that because she sees it as like showing weakness,
yeah, a sign of
which is
weakness,
just
exactly.
I mean, that is how Verona handles her problems, right? Is
Hmm.
she, when she's alone and there's no one watching, she can sit there and sort of percolate on it. But the second someone's around, she buries that shit down and doesn't deal with it.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, the other side of this as well, I think we more find out about it last chapter, but she got offered medication, but she doesn't want to take it because
Mm,
she's like understandably hesitant to do drugs,
mm,
and I find myself very on the fence with this because I do know that the overuse of painkillers and things like antibiotics is definitely a thing,
mm.
but then also you probably do need that, Verona. Like she talks
Yeah.
about how she got like crippled by a hand cramp in the shower that morning, and it's like, well, you know what would help with that?
Yeah, take your meds. Yeah, and like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I can, I'm definitely on the fence with it as well because I can totally see a world where Verona taking her meds is a gateway into her going down a dark path, right? Like, fully, I can see that.
Yeah,
But
like
also,
obviously there's the opioid epidemic, which is
yes,
been a thing for a while now. So it, it's hard to, if somebody gets given serious painkillers, it's hard for me to completely judge them for not taking them because that can lead to very bad things.
yes, but it is also a perfect example of Verona not being willing to accept that she can't just tough it out and have that solve all her problems, you know? Like
Yeah, yeah,
she's so unwilling to slow down and let herself be not operating at 100%, right? Like I don't know.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's just Verona. I should admit I'm being a bit of a hypocrite here. I reckon about half the times I've been prescribed antibiotics by a doctor, I just haven't ever gone and cashed it in because I don't like taking antibiotics.
Yeah.
So I am absolutely in no place to judge her for this.
You're more of a probiotic man.
Yeah, I just feel like I get given antibiotics too often,
Sure. I
too
mean,
easily.
yeah, 100%. The overprescription of antibiotics is obviously a thing.
Yep. Anyway, but yeah, like yeah, so I don't know. This hand is going to be super interesting as a bit of a symbol for
Mm.
how Verona is dealing with the aftermath of the whole summer break fiasco.
Well, yeah, I mean, we described that her hand is cramping up or clawing. I mean, if she's thinking of turning into another, her hand becoming a claw is probably the first step on that journey. So we'll see
Yeah,
how
but
it goes.
she
Maybe
says
she
she's thinking
wants a
of it as a
claw.
cat's claw.
Yeah.
Yeah, she says she's thinking of it as a cat claw, which helps. And I can see that. Uh,
Um,
sorry, Sleeping Beluga just brought out a great point in the chat, which is Verona is the only Canneteer who doesn't have one of those barometers for how herself is doing. Like we know Lucy had her hair, which, as Sleeping Beluga points out, it's been a while since we got an update on Lucy's hair. But obviously, like Avery is actively rocking her bracelets now. Um,
mm,
like Verona is the one who is at this point kind of out of touch with how herself is doing, which we'll talk about that, I guess, at the end of the chapter when she thinks about it too.
Yeah. Um, yeah. But yeah, so Verona starts interviewing the school kids and kind of reveals that she's looking for a teacher, or, looking for anybody who's stumbled into Hell School, but quickly learns there's a substitute teacher who is here that shouldn't be.
Yeah, and we see Mallory doing some amateur tattoo work. So
Yeah.
if we continue to have trouble getting our pack tattoos, we know who we can ring as a backup.
Yeah, I mean, this really just demonstrates that we could do our own tattoos, I think.
Yeah,
Do
why am
our
I
own
paying
stick and
so
poke
much?
vibe tattoo. With what was it? It wasn't like a uncoiled paperclip. What is it that she's using to poke the ink in?
I thought it
Poke the
was.
hole? Is it
Yeah,
a
it was
paperclip?
something
It
like
is a
that.
paperclip. Okay, great. Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. Um, but yeah, God, this school, huh?
Um, yeah, I love that as Verona starts to meet these people and like bounce off them. One of the things she thinks is everyone, and that's italicized. Everyone in this new underbelly of Kennet oozed complicated in some way. Drama bombs and people who didn't have their shit together. People with no restraint. And particularly because the everyone was italicized there, I just couldn't help but read that for Verona and think,
Yeah.
present company included, right, Verona? Like, she's absolutely putting herself in that category.
I mean, there's a number of beats throughout this chapter of like, oh, these are the kinds of people that find their way here. And I mean, Verona must be aware that it kind of feels like she belongs here in a number of ways.
Well, when she first asks Mallory, like, "Is there anyone here who doesn't belong?" Mallory's like, "Oh, I was gonna say you, but actually I can see it," which is like
Yeah,
the first of
exactly.
many beats of just Verona is home here,
Yeah.
to a certain extent.
And so the other thing that we start to notice pretty quickly is this school really has like prison vibes, like DIY tattoos, the kind of bartering for information. Like it feels like a prison, or at least I've
Yeah, I mean,
never been to prison. It feels like,
Gashwad's
mm.
yeah, it's the tropes. Like Gashwad's selling shivs, like
Yeah,
cigarettes are a currency. Like it's hitting all the tropes.
yeah, very explicitly. And so I was kind of thinking about this and like, why does the Undercity, or at least this part of the Undercity, have such prison vibes? And I had a few thoughts around like, school as a prison is kind of a very
Yeah,
adults just don't understand kind of vibe trope. But also Charles as a character is someone who has given us pretty heavy ex-con vibes, right? Like
yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's a link there of like Charles making the Undercity feel more like a prison as a reflection of his own, imprisonment.
Yeah, I hadn't thought to connect it to Charles, but I like the idea that Liz and Charles are actively shaping the Undercity to a degree to suit their agenda. Like one thing that jumped out to me after reading that you'd written that is every time Verona says that she's a practitioner, Mal says, "There's something about that word that just makes me want to punch you," like when you
Yes.
call yourself a practitioner,
Yeah. That
which
feels like a Charles
definitely
influence, doesn't it?
yeah, like that's Liz and Charles's influence, like for sure, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, like this would be like this feels like something that would happen when you get someone like Charles who does what he did to get in onto the top. Is he just wants change? He doesn't really care about how he's doing it. And as everyone's talked about, what that means is like a lot of bad shit comes with him. And the idea that like this kind of really shitty prison like economy is part of it totally tracks to me. Like that's it's like a not a better solution. Like this is still shitty in all of its own ways. And if this is the sort of thing that Charles brings with him now that he's in charge, it just feels right for like did you really make things better, you idiot?
Mm, yeah. Yeah, 100%.
I suppose that the other thing that very much feels like a potential Charles and Liz influence here is one of the big things that has been inverted is that people here are very much not like restrained is the word that's used, but like I
Mm,
think complacent would also be appropriate. Like something we
mm,
learn towards the end of the chapter is there's already been a revolution against the original vice principal. Like
yeah.
the people here the new vice principal is scared. Like everyone's scared of her, but she's like fair,
Mm,
and like that just feels like that's how Charles sees himself, right? Like he's done some
mm.
bad things, but he's leading this revolution, and now he's like intimidating and harsh, but fair.
Trying to set up a
Um,
fair system. I like that.
yeah. So, like, I can sort of see that aspect of this Undercity being, again, Liz and Charles putting some of their spin on things where it's like, this system might not be perfect, but we are overthrowing one that's worse. And, people, the heroes of this Undercity and the people who are doing well are the people who aren't complacent and allowing bad people to, like, continue doing bad things.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I want to track that thread because, like, this is what we've kind of been a bit talking about with Charles. Is he wants to disrupt the system to set up his own system, but our criticism, or at least my criticism of that, has often been he doesn't really have a plan for what that is, and he doesn't have a plan for how to make it a stable thing that won't just go back to what what existing
Yeah.
society is. It's interesting. The
Um,
underside feels it feels you're right. It does feel more fair. It feels like a system that can be existed in, even though it's brutal. And maybe that is Charles making his case a bit. You know what I mean? Like a number
yeah.
of others. Like we'll get to Freak and Squeak. We'll get to Gash. Like they feel like they fit quite nicely in the system in a way that's not monstrous. That any more monstrous
Yeah.
than the Undercity itself. Like yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, well, Tash stands as our great example. Like, I am jumping ahead in the notes, but Tashlet, like, one of the big things that Verona and Tash sort of take away from their time here is Tashlet can just walk
Can
around
just
and
be
be in
yeah
this space.
yeah
And that, like, this is the whole thing with the Undercity is there's obviously stuff to hate here, but there's stuff to like,
yeah.
and that's one of the big ones is the equality for others is massively improved here.
Mm,
uh yeah, Tashlet doesn't have to be afraid of people seeing her until we find the one innocent in the area. Like, yeah, and I mean, this is Charles and Liz's whole thing is like, they weren't wrong about wanting to get rid of the system. We all agreed that
yeah.
the existing seal was shitty for a lot of people. And there is going to be some stuff that is better, and like I'm viewing the Undercity at this point as a bit of a you know, small, like isolated but very strong example of kind of their whole deal. And
Yes.
that's there's stuff to like here alongside because they were trying to fix some bad things. So some of the stuff they're doing is a bit of an improvement. It's coming with costs as well.
Yeah. I think the thing we should touch on here, again, we're kind of jumping all over the notes, but that's fine, is there's no place for the innocents in this Undercity, right? Like, the one
No,
innocent that we see is clearly so out of place and having such a bad time. Like, if this is Charles's, pitch for what he wants, it feels pretty good for the others and the practitioners. It really doesn't fit the innocence in at all.
no, which I mean, we've seen how much innocence kind of holds down others. So I mean, this is that whole thing. I think when Lucy brought it up with Crooked Rook, like innocence in and of itself doesn't seem like a bad thing, but it's also kind of designed to keep others down and keep them outside of society.
Mm,
Like, the idea that, oh, people should just be allowed to be protected and not struggle with the bad others feels like a good idea. But then what it's really led to is that others have to exist on the outskirts unless they can pass as human.
mm,
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. Like, I don't know how much of this stuff to attribute directly to Charles and Liz, and how much is just because it's like an undercity. Because we know there are other ones. Like some of the stuff, like there's fun inversions of like the stereotypical status quo, like the way girls are getting in physical fights over a boy feels like a great inversion of like a classic high school movie trope.
mm,
The kindergartners being in charge and like a young woman sort of running the school, like it's all just the exact opposite of how social hierarchies usually
mm.
traditionally work. And maybe that's just like a focus thing. Like maybe what Liz and Charles are doing here is like that.
Just
They're
trying to
very
shake
focused on.
things up.
Well, yeah, they're focused on social upheaval, so it's
Yeah.
primarily the social hierarchy that has been flipped in the
Mm,
Undercity.
mm, yeah.
I mean, to jump back to the whole thing about how nobody here is like complacent and just sitting around doing nothing. It's
Mm.
worth pointing out that is the exact opposite of like Ken's whole
Of
vibe
Ken.
as
Yeah,
well.
exactly.
Um, which we know Ken was set up to be the
Mm,
worst sort of thing, and to not do anything. So like Liz trying to build this undercity that is kind of the exact opposite of what he stood for, kind of tracks.
yeah. I want to just call
Um,
out this comment from Quantum Hacker in the chat because I think it's good. We've been talking about about the Undercity as a microcosm for Charles's plan. Quantum Hacker takes that one step further and says, maybe at some point something will go wrong with the Undercity that will foreshadow how Charles's plan will fail in the practitioner world. Yeah, I think an
yeah,
interesting thread to keep an eye on. Like, what are the we see a pretty solid pitch for the Undercity here, apart from if you're an innocent, but let's keep an eye on that and see what are the downsides as we explore it a bit more. Other than
yeah,
the
like
shocking brutality of it, I suppose.
yeah, I mean, this is the fun of it. Like, yeah, as that sort of microcosm of what Charles and Liz seem to kind of be aiming for, it's our perfect little like test bed
Yeah,
to sort of see how the experiment can go. Uh, Ian Frank brings up a great little point in the chat too, which is obviously we focus on the school here, and we know Liz started in a school. Ties into some of the stuff we'll probably talk about later based on what's in the notes, but
yeah,
eh, we're probably doing a bit of a disservice here. We're focusing so much on how this place reflects Charles and Liz. We should also just talk about how perfect it is for Verona right now as well.
yeah.
I mean, this is why Wildboat made her the one who's diving in here because it's this perfect, merging of these two separate parts of the story.
Mm,
Because yeah, Verona has she is the one who's always struggled the most to fit in with sort of society and like conform. She's always been the artistic one. Like the benefits of the Undercity are almost perfectly tailored to appeal to Verona.
yes.
uh like it's not just hitting all those beats that like the Kenneteers and the Kennet others agree with Charles on. It almost feels specifically designed to just appeal to Verona specifically.
Mm,
And so like as great as it is to sort of focus on like the Charles and Liz side, I also just think it's super interesting for like Verona is our Kenneteer who always vibed with Mariska as well.
mm,
And I think as Charles and as we move forward with Charles and Liz and see more of what they're trying to do, and as Charles gets further in his plans, Verona is maybe going to become a little bit of the voice who's like focusing on the good parts of what they're achieving. I don't know. I just the fact that she vibes so well with the place that we've identified as like a microcosm of what they're trying to do, and the
mm.
fact that she's always vibed with Marissa, I continue to worry about like how Verona might need to act at some point. Like it's just the new form of the fact that Marissa and Verona always vibed, I guess.
Yeah, I like that as a call out. Let's keep an eye on it, I suppose.
Yeah, because I don't know that I expect Verona to like break bad and work against the Kenneteers, at
No,
least for an
but definitely
extended
make
period
the
of time.
case
But
for the Undercity a bit more.
yeah, like she's going to get to be the one who, at the very least, sort of because where I'm standing at the end of having seen the Undercity is like, yeah, there's good, there's bad, but there's also good, and like I just want to cherry pick bits from each. Like
Mm,
I'm we're going to talk a lot about how they can balance later on, and that's sort of where I'm at, and I feel like Verona's going to be the voice of that side of the argument.
mm, yeah. Yeah. So Verona picks up a friend, Mal, and they head off together, coming across more horrors in the school as they do.
But just a side note, Mal is such a fucking great name for our guide to this Undercity. Like it's obviously the Latin word for bad.
Hmm.
And I just feel like meeting bad and bad being like, oh yeah, I'll come
I'll
with
show
you
you
and I'll
around.
show you
Yeah.
around. It's just that's the vibe of this place, and I love it.
Yeah. Very fun. Um, yeah, we get introduced to one of our new main characters here, Trenchcoat Mouse, who will presumably play a major role in the story going forward. Who knows? Is it a? It's a mouse in a trench coat. Is that right? Like what? Yeah. Okay. I mean,
I
we'll see.
so the vibe I got from this was obviously there's a very bad interpretation of person in a trench coat hanging around a school,
Yes.
and the fact that Verona doesn't want to talk about them. I basically I think the mouse flashed her, and
Mm,
that's why she just really doesn't want to talk about it. And so I think I'm fine with us not revisiting Trenchcoat Mouse.
mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Trenchcoat Mouse. We'll see. We'll see. Um, I also just really liked. So they come across this kind of fight, this spat. It's not even worth calling it a spat because it's so much more brutal. Of two people fighting in a bathroom and to curb stomp each other on a toilet lid, and then the girl wins. And then the guy who they were fighting over is just kind of fully like going with the winner of the battle, like, "Yep, you beat my ex, therefore I will now kiss you." You know, thumbs up. Like it gave me
Yep.
major Carol, Jerry, Sandra vibes from Superstore, which is available now on Netflix. Pretty fun show I've been enjoying recently. But yeah, just like
Just had to get that plug in there, didn't you?
yeah, it's just a great ref of like the how defined by the rules this place is, I suppose.
Yeah, well, it's again, it's the inversion of that high school movie trope where two guys will fight over a girl, and then the girl will hate them both for fighting in the first place. Like that feels
Mm,
like what I expect every B grade movie from the '90s to do in this situation, and
mm.
this place does the opposite. It's two girls fighting over a boy, and then the boy just like kisses whoever wins. He does check that she didn't actually lick the toilet first, which
Well, yeah, thank God for that. Am I right?
yeah. So just going back to Trenchcoat Mouse, Wobbo brought up a great point in the chat, which is that it's extra worth noting that Verona is not cool with the Trenchcoat Mouse, whereas she's usually the person who loves like freaky, scary looking others.
Yeah,
Um,
your
'Cause,
interpretation definitely feels bang on point to me.
yeah, like if Verona took one look at you and doesn't like what you're about, that tells me that you did something wrong, not that you look wrong.
Mm, yeah,
Because she doesn't judge a book by its cover. But yeah, no, this fight with the toilet is obviously like this is where to me the place went from like whimsically terrible to just like
yeah,
I was like, oh, this is just straight up traumatic.
yeah, yeah. Like it gives me a real like uh purgatory vibe of like these entities are just trapped playing out these horrific cycles here.
Yeah, although like as we're about to meet some of the goblins and stuff, it is worth pointing out we don't quite get any indication as to whether these guys are like hardier than normal humans.
Well,
Because
I feel like they are based on the
I mean
curb stomping
I mean,
scene.
she had to be carried out. I don't know that because like
Mm,
that's the thing. I think like the reason goblin violence is usually a bit more okay in my head
mm.
is
Or
because
feels
they
a bit more
recover so
slapstick.
quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, like when we saw Cherry Pop in her interlude, there was that time where like her boss broke her legs and her hips and forced her to sit in a corner for 6 days. And the
Mm,
thing that upset her about that wasn't the broken hip. I think she actually said broken hips can be funny. It was that she got left alone
mm.
um, for that time. So it was like with goblins, they're so hardy that the physical violence itself isn't really the issue.
Yeah.
Um, and with these people, we don't really know yet. Like, yeah, it's so much more horrifying if they're like roughly as vulnerable as regular humans to physical violence.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, really gives it very unsettling, vibes.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, Verona catches up with some of her allies. Pekka, Snot, and Tashlit are here. Hooray! The dream team.
the dream team. Yeah, I was so thrilled to see these two.
Yeah.
Especially, after reading 14.2 and just focusing on how alone Lucy was, it was
Yes.
so good that Verona's gone to this scary place and then just her friends show up and I was like, "Oh, thank fuck."
Yeah, and Tash is just here and they're just having a good time hanging out, like in a very
Yep.
healthy friendship kind of way. Tash and Verona are great supports for each other. Or yeah, at the very least, Tash is a great support for Verona, and you get the sense that Tash enjoys their friendship too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Tasha's so good for her, like, yeah. And I do think it goes the other way, but, obviously later on, we'll get to the point where Verona does kind of, pop the big question, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, I mean, something that's a part of that whole thing is Tashlet is in the process of transforming into something like more and more other, or monstrous.
Mm.
And you do think the familiar ritual would put a dampener on that. So, like, I'm just it's interesting to think about the other side, like, because obviously here we're focusing on Verona. She's in this very other place. The people who she's asked to come and join her are her other friends. Like, she definitely feels like she's diving down that rabbit hole, as you said, of like avoiding her human side of her.
Mm.
And whereas for Tashlet, this place is the opposite. For Tashlet, this place lets her be more human than she has for ages. She's
Yeah.
able to just walk around the school, and this is almost their relationship in a way. Tashlet pulls Verona a bit away from humanity in the way she likes, and Verona
Mm.
pulls Tashlet a bit closer towards it.
But
Yeah,
in a very healthy feeling way for Verona. Like
yeah,
I'm not
or for
worried
both. Yeah,
about, well, true, but I'm worried about Verona's descent into otherness normally, but not as a result of Tashlet. Tashlet feels like such a healthy, supportive
Yeah.
friend. Yeah.
I mean, the thing with Verona's want to be other for me has often been about the fact that she didn't have a set goal in mind. Like, she just seemed willing to just try and carve bits out of herself because she didn't like them right now. And
Yes.
like for me, the concern around that is you're not thinking about the long term consequences or what that means. So like the thing about Tashlit is like Tashlit sort of represents this cool part of other than that she vibes with, and it's like yeah,
Yeah.
like if you're heading in a specific direction, you're trying to do something that you've sort of thought out. Like
Yeah.
I can see myself
You
getting
can see
behind that.
that. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Um,
Um,
yeah,
yeah. So yeah, the gang gets summoned to speak with the VP, and we meet this vice principal, and it's an 8-year-old riding the old principal around like a horsey, which is great.
so it's so fucking good. This is one of my favorite reveals of all time because I was expecting like the vice principal that we see who's in the cage. Like I was expecting an adult who was like a military
Yes.
dictator.
Yes.
Of course, it's actually a girl dressed up in a fairy outfit riding
Yeah,
that person. It's so
because
good.
yeah, it fits so perfectly, and like the build up for this vice principal and then payoff is so wonderful. Like, and then
Yeah,
the visuals of this scene of them all just kind of the heads of state or whatever riding around on adults with cages on their heads with like sashes saying like, "Oh, I'm in charge of economics" or whatever. Like, I'm the school nurse. Like, it's so fucking delightful. Like the visuals of this are so wonderful.
yeah. I mean, we probably just should, like your blanket rule for this whole Undercity. Like visually, it just seems
Yeah, yeah.
incredible. I realized towards the end of reading the chapter for the second time that I'd pictured the whole place with like quite a strong orange filter over it, like very
Mm,
very post-apocalyptic movie filter.
yeah.
Um, And moments like this really lean into that, like, just seeing that suddenly there's, yeah, kids, like, yeah, riding the adults around dressed up as fairies. It's so wrong, but in a way that's so right for this
Yeah.
space.
Yeah, it's very fun.
Uh,
Very, very fun.
yeah, like, that
Um,
that sort of recess style post-apocalypse vibe really comes to the fore here.
mm. Yeah, and obviously Freak and Squeak are here. Um, and like I guess we kind of touched on this a bit more, but yeah, like with Freak and Squeak or Gash, what they were about to see, it really feels like it almost gives me this vibes of like nature is recovering after a tragedy. Like there's been some kind of big natural disaster, and nature is healing in the cracks, right?
Yeah.
After this Carmine contest, that we're starting to see, yeah, just like a bit of stability coming in where the others are now finding natural roles and places in the ecosystem. And if you think about it for more than a few seconds, it's rough because it totally validates Charles as the Carmine, but like it feels like it's settling in a way that is, I don't know, manageable.
Yeah, like, I mean, as you said, we meet Freak and Squeaky, and sorry, I just
Mm.
gotta call out, like, the second you see that Freak is one of the council members, it's just a second, like, this is a one-two punch of, "Oh, of course,"
Yeah, it
like,
makes perfect
of
sense.
course of course Freak is the fucking guidance counselor of the school, like, that's just
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and, like, the delivery like, this happens about 3 paragraphs after you find out who the vice principal is, so you think you've already been hit with the twist, and then suddenly freaking Squeaker here and in charge, and it's like, "Oh, yeah, of course." Um,
Yeah, it's wonderful.
but, yeah, no, you're right, like, like, this is again, like, this has sort of been the theme of the Undercity for us is, there is a lot to like here amongst all of the horror, and that's the trap of, like, Charles's whole MO. Uh like we've got a lost like well, not just an other but a lost other sitting on the council of this school who just kind of naturally was accepted and fits on the top, and I suppose she kind of passes as a human, but she's got Squeak as her other half. Yeah, like it feels so much more equitable for the others here, as you're
Mm.
saying. I mean, this brings me back to the big question we had coming out of 14.1 though, which is now we obviously know that we have like an elemental and other in charge of Thunder Bay, and I can't wait to continue to explore that. Like that has to be a thing, and that will, for me, be an important point of comparison. Like we have others being accepted and supported here in like Vice Kennet, but we also do have an other on top in Thunder Bay. So what is different about those two ecosystems? Because I don't trust that the Thunder Bay one is as good for others overall.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I guess we've talked about this a lot. Like, I'm kind of getting sold on Charles's vision from the Undercity here, at least somewhat.
But yeah, I mean that's the trap. Like we never
Yeah,
disagreed
yeah,
with a whole bunch of his points. It
yeah,
was how he was doing it, and
yeah,
I think that's going to continue to be the theme. Is the Undercity has a lot to like about it, but
yeah. You're right.
I
We
can't help
will.
but worry that yeah, there'll
There's going to be
be
some
the
downsides for sure.
the problematic parts will become more and more prominent. I'm sure.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see our first chapter of Lucy coming here and what our opinion of it is, because we do have to remember we're getting this through the Verona filter, which very intentionally focuses on the good parts, which is a good thing, I think, for us. But I'd love to like see my opinion of it after a chapter of Lucy coming here, because she would definitely focus on like the injustices and the violence a lot more. I think.
Mm, yeah.
Like, just how much the point of view character sort of shapes our opinion of this place is probably worth remembering.
Mm,
That said, though, like, this whole moment with the vice principal where Freak basically has to, like, vouch for Verona,
mm,
and she sort of sets Verona up as this, like, the reluctant hero who'll come in at the last minute and totally save the day and be like a cool action hero from an anime. Um, I love this because like the vice principal clearly gets so into it because of course she's like a child, so she loves that shit. But it also just plays into that's exactly what Verona wants to be. Like we talked about this in Arc 13. Verona wants to be that person who makes the big move and saves the day and like is a valuable member of the team because of the thing that she specifically did.
mm,
Like this was that whole thing where with her and Avery, like Avery's like, oh, you're better off doing a C grade plan with your team rather than going off on your own to do the A grade plan. And Verona groaned at that because like Verona is that person who wants to have that moment of like the big drama, like I came and I saved the day. Um,
mm.
and I just thought it was so interesting that Freak perhaps accidentally, I think, played Verona as well as she played the vice principal right here.
Yeah, no, I like that call out. Like, yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily playing or manipulating as just like Verona fitting so naturally into these systems that she has a role
Yeah,
ready and waiting for her. You know?
that's true. Just the natural sort of thing this space tried to put her in is just kind of what she wanted to be anyway. Like you're right, that totally fits her whole vibe with this place. Is she just
Mm,
naturally fit in?
yeah.
I really like that. I can't wait to sort of see how her relationship with the vice principal goes if she is meant to be like the vice principal's secret weapon. Especially because the vice principal's the one who's like, "You've gotta sort out your mask," and I was like, "Oh, I'm totally on the vice principal's side now, she's right."
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, yeah. I feel
I
like we're hitting the beat of Verona just fitting in perfectly a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I think the chapter does.
Yeah.
Um, I like that we really see Verona considering her mask here
Mm,
as well. Or like, obviously, it's sort of brought up by the vice principal, but, she'll think on it more later in the chapter, but I just kinda like this as, these 3 chapters have all been about each Kenneteer kinda moving on to the next step in their journeys, during this fallout, and Verona's is clearly about trying to decide, like, who she wants to be.
mm,
And obviously, like, the mask has been sitting in the background for so long because she hasn't been actively considering that. Like, it broke, and Verona's sort of left it as like, "Oh, I have other priorities." And now herself is becoming the priority. So, of course, the mask is coming back, and I can't wait to see where she's going to finally take it.
mm, yeah. Yeah, we'll see, I suppose.
So, two last things before we move on from this section. First of
Mm.
all, we totally skipped over Cherry Pop's Rock Shop. Just too late to get into our round of advertisements from the episode. I'm now realizing isn't actually out yet. That's my bad. So those of you listening live,
Oh,
will
yeah.
appreciate that joke later. Um,
Yeah.
I love like this was great comedy. This moment where Cherry's just so bad at numbers that she's promised Gashwat 150% of her revenue.
Yeah. It's,
Um,
pretty funny.
and she makes a
Uh,
sale. It's so good. I love that rocks have just somehow become Cherry Pop's whole thing.
mm,
Like I don't know where that's going, but I know I'm gonna love the shit out of it when we figure it out.
mm, yeah. Yeah. The yeah, God. I love Cherry Pop. She's so wonderful.
And we should point out Gashwad, who is like her operating her caravan. Um, Verona explicitly calls out that he is intentionally stepping on Toadswallow's toes here.
Mm.
And this feels like, just another fun seed to plant. We're talking so much in Arc 14 so far about big directional stuff where the story is going to go, and this is definitely one. Like our loner goblin is, sort of pushing against the boundaries of what Toadswall is okay with. Like Gashwald was the one person who didn't explicitly take Toadswall's side against Blunt. Like it's
Mm,
the potential sort of discord between Toad and Gash is going to be super interesting to track. Just
mm.
add it to the list of shit I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Also, sorry, to jump back to the vice principal. So
Mm.
she kind of acts like a lord. So Verona needs to bring her gifts when she comes, and
Yes.
I would love that her request for gifts is anything with zebra stripes, candy, or anything with mermaids.
Yeah.
Just because, like,
Pretty straightforward.
just compare that to what Avery had to give Thunder Bay. Like last week, Rona's got off easy. She can just bring in some chocolate bars or like a mermaid coloring book.
Yep. I mean, yeah, it's again a representation of how Charles' system is just a much better system than the other classic like lordships, current practitioner
Yeah,
systems.
like the vice principal is harsh, but so far seems also kind of fair. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of bluster and bullshit in how you have to deal with her. Like you
Mm,
have to sort of recognize she's on top and all that sort of bullshit that does play into how it feels you'd have to talk to Charles. But
mm,
um yeah, I mean at the end of the day, she doesn't actually ask for that much and she's been pretty fair with Verona.
mm, yeah. Um,
Also, sorry, Gashwad is selling. Isn't he? He's selling shivs. Is he also selling toilet paper, or is toilet paper a currency he accepts? I just love how willingly everyone in this undercity has just taken to toilet paper being a currency.
I mean, again, it's very prison trope, right?
Well, 2020.
Yeah. Well, yeah, true.
Um,
I mean, we've all been living in our own prisons for the past year, haven't we?
yeah. Good point. Yeah, I just think it's funny that like if Verona wants to do very well here, all she needs to do is make sure she doesn't get mugged and just like go buy a ream of toilet paper
Mm.
like in the overworld and just bring it in here and it's like instant financial
Instant
gains.
wealth. Yeah.
Yeah, screw investing in the stock market. You want to just bring in a couple of rolls of toilet paper.
Yeah. So yeah, Verona and the gang find and fetch the substitute teacher who is out of place, and head to get her back home. Um,
Yep.
so yeah, again, this teacher is innocent with a capital I, but not that innocent. She's a teacher who showed up to work, a first grade teacher who showed up to work drunk. So there's a real like karmic justice sense to why she showed up here. And no, she doesn't deserve this. But again, this system kind of works.
Yeah, it's yeah, I don't know, the way that it sort of acts as a wake up call for her and she potentially is going to like if this helps turn her life around, it's hard to view it as entirely negative. It's yeah, I don't know, it's tricky.
And the other thing that we should talk about from this section, of course, is Verona, propositions Tashlit. They confess that they're best friends with each other, and then Verona asks if Tashlit wants to be a familiar, which is great. Like, they're obviously a healthy partnership, and also, if Verona injures herself doing dumb stuff, Tashlit can heal her, which is a great team up. The obvious question is, what animal form would Tashlit take, Elliot? What do you got?
Yeah. No, I am interested to hear from the chat as well, because I gave this a bit of thought, and like
Mm,
Cat is a great fit for Verona, but terrible for Tash because we know she hates those.
mm.
I did briefly consider whether she might just be human because I think they said they can do that. Familiars.
That's interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
but I haven't got an animal that feels right for both of them. Like I was, it'd have to be something amphibious, right? Because Tashlet is so affiliated with
Yes.
water. Um,
Yeah.
like the best I could come up with was like, are there any big-eyed frogs? So I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
An owl.
Um,
Yeah, I
I'm
don't know.
seeing a water snake. Like, people think Tash has kind of snake vibes, and some kind of aquatic snake could work.
Oh
I think
yeah,
that could work.
I have a big
A
model sea
catfish, yeah.
snake somewhere around here. I loved sea
There's
snakes as a
obviously,
kid. That was one of my obsessions for a bit as a kid.
well, because obviously she's like part serpent, part
Yeah, yeah.
divine kind of vibes. So
But there are some species of frogs that were like worshipped in some parts of the world. I'm pretty sure, which is why I first thought frog. But yeah, it'd need to be
Mm.
something. Yeah, oh no, snake does suit Verona. I mean, that was her like other mask thing. Snakes are really adding up. Uh,
Snakes Shed Their Skin by
yeah.
Quantum Hacker in the thread. That's a good one.
And because
All
like yeah,
right,
if
I'm
you've got
liking a
like
snake.
yeah, if you've got one of those sea snaky type ones that can go in and out of the water, like yeah, there's because
Mm.
that's a super important part to me is I feel like Tashlet's form would have to be water compatible.
Mm. Malia says a dragonfly, which I think is a good one as well.
Oh yeah,
Feels quite nice. Very kind of not obviously doesn't swim, but does exist around
yeah,
aquatic environments.
yeah. But like
Um,
just because if you take the step back, I think the reason I've been sold on Snake is I can totally picture Verona wanting to be a person who walks into a room with a snake draped around her neck. Like that
yeah,
is
that's totally her vibe.
absolutely yeah. Like she would be all about that shit. So because
Yeah,
the thing with
100%.
the thing with the familiar animal vibes that we always hear is that it tends to make sense for both people in retrospect.
Mm,
And
mm,
I think the snake is the first one that feels like it does that to me. And we kind of
mm.
skipped that whole thing with Snowdrop because she was already part opossum. So
Yeah,
like there wasn't really a thing with
it
her.
felt like a very natural connection. Yeah. Um, so yeah, Verona kind of mulls over the day she's had as she walks home. At home, she has a brief and painfully familiar interaction with Brett.
um, yeah, I mean, I guess to just get the Brett shit out of the way. Um, I know that's not the order it's in our notes, but it's
Yeah,
just
but no, it's very
exactly
familiar. Yeah.
it's exactly what it was at the start of the story, where like he's acting like it's fine and she's indulging him, and in 30 words, he makes it all
Yeah.
about himself.
Yeah.
And yeah, like Verona's just put herself back to square one, and it's like, so this is just a time bomb at this point. Like it started
Yeah.
ticking. Um, to move on to a more positive topic, she talks about like where the Undercity is going to go with Matthew and like how terrible that's
Mm,
going to be.
mm.
Still better than talking about Brett. I thought this was a super interesting topic to kind of discuss with Matt because something that I started to think about, like even as soon as Mallory got her name, basically at the start of the chapter, was
Mm.
once Mallory was named and I realized was like a person, I was already like, well, we
Yeah.
can't just destroy the Undercity, like because my first thought when you hear you're getting
No,
an
people
Undercity,
live here now.
yeah,
Yeah.
like the first thought is, oh well, let's close it back down and get rid of it. But yeah, like there are people here now, and like Mallory, she's all right. Like vice principal, she rides adults in cages, which isn't ideal, but she's all right. Like whether we like it or not, the Undercity now exists, and there's people there, and I don't think we
Mm.
can like ethically just undo it.
Yeah.
And like so this is going to be another really interesting angle for how the Undercity fits in as a metaphor for what Charles and Liz are doing, because I think like the last thing we want is for Charles to get taken down and things to go back to the way they were.
No, I think that's not. It definitely feels like there's no going back to how things were
Well,
vibes. Like,
I mean
it's
there could be.
finding an equilibrium.
Yeah, like if Massa got his way, we would go back to how things were. I
Sure.
think now
I
what
don't think that's going to happen.
I think he could make it happen. Like, if Massa
Mm,
takes Charles down, they put a normal Carmine in charge. I think they could absolutely just sort of, there'll be this practitioner civil war or whatever. But a year from now, this will just be, oh, remember the bad
mm,
times, but now it's all back to normal.
mm,
And that's not what Kenneth would want. Like I think this is like Miss and Rook are presumably now pivoting to how can we just like co-opt what Charles is doing. And so this is where the Undercity feels like again another microcosm for the whole Liz and Charles thing, because if we can figure out a way to have the Undercity start to coexist with Kenneth, or figure out a way to make it exist without destroying Kenneth or vice versa, that feels like the first steps to doing that on a macro scale with what Charles has been doing.
mm. Yeah. 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 God, I just. I'm. We've really just moved into a whole other part of the story, haven't we? Because it's just
Yeah.
so impossible to know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the this is what we were sort of talking about last week, or maybe in again that reflecting episode that still isn't out as of the time we're recording this. Like
Mm.
This is really just the first segment of the story where we're sitting here and it's like we don't have an end game or a deadline that the story is moving towards anymore. So
Mm.
we look at things like this and like, yeah, the best we could do is sort of say, oh, this Undercity might work as a microcosm for fighting Charles, but is fighting Charles the end game? I feel like it probably is, but
Yeah, maybe.
like yeah, like or rather than fighting Charles, co-opting what he's doing and making it better. I don't know.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I want to call out this quote from the chapter, which I just think perfectly sums up where Verona's head's at. She looks up at the sky, which is all kind of carmine and fucked up, and then thinks, it had been easier over there, which is just 100% exactly where Verona's head is at.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, exactly. Like that place was so much better suited to her, and that's what's good about Charles's stuff. That like
Mm.
there's plenty of bad. Um, I I think the other thing to think about here, like as we're worried about like Verona's day trip to the Undercity, is she definitely implies that she believes that missing this first day of school is her
Mm.
missing a big event punishment from the glass.
Mm.
About a paragraph after she says that, she also explains to Lucy that it's fine that she missed the first day of school because the first day of school is never important.
Yeah. No, I
So
definitely don't buy this is the thing that she misses for the glass.
I was thinking about it, and I think it could be because like this glass thing, it's from the fairy, right? Like it's fairy associated. So it was maybe naive to think that the consequences of missing the event would be that you miss the event. It's going to be way
Mm.
more subtle and dramatic, and so like I could see like maybe it's the issue isn't that she missed the first day of school. It's like the precedent that has been set. Like she successfully used this doppelganger that we're going to get to, and it kind of
Yeah.
worked. And she's clearly looking to do it more again. And so, like, I think
Yeah.
like the missing the school wasn't the point of the punishment. The punishment is more that like this is how things are landing. Like it's a bit more like how Alexander stopped John and Lucy, being best friends with his thing. Like it didn't manifest, or it
Mm.
manifested in that way where the universe kind of just made it happen, where it was like, oh, she saw him shoot Alexander in the head and that traumatized her and that sort of opened that distance that never healed. Um,
Mm.
like, is this what the glass has sort of done? It's helped push Verona. Like, it helped made her dad take her to the doctor that morning by giving her the hand cramp that morning, which then meant that she was
Mm.
in the prime position to explore the Undercity, which has just kicked off that, chain of events, which means she's going to do this more often. And that's the actual, like, punishment.
That's the cost. Yeah. 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 I think so.
Uh, so, yeah,
It
fun to
feels a
think
lot more
about.
fair, doesn't it? um, so yeah, Verona goes back to her room and literally takes a long, hard look at herself. Only literally, doesn't do that figuratively, but she does dismiss the part of her that deals with the human side of life, both literally and figuratively here.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those moments where Pale tries really hard to make sure that you're picking up on the metaphor it's laying down by having her basically think that. Um,
Yeah.
I love this reveal though because like obviously we've been talking about this whole chapter about how this is Verona diving into her otherness, and I think you're already there when you're reading the chapter, and then for the chapter to just end on like, oh, you didn't even realize how much she's doing this. Like she sent out a
Yeah.
doppelganger to do her human life. Like this is
Yeah.
so much more of a thing than you thought it was.
Yeah, but what do you think of this, Elliot? Like, again, I think I agree with you that Lucy is the one that we really need to worry about right now. But this is very much just a flag of like red flag, red flag going on
Yeah.
here.
Oh, I mean, it's not like Verona has a history of like unhealthy avoidance patterns.
No,
Um,
of course not.
yeah, yeah, no, this is absolutely a like. There's some stuff I really liked about where Verona is on her journey in this chapter, like for her, but this is definitely one of the parts where you're like, oh, this is not good.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
like as we sort of said, like we already talked about how Verona vibing so much with the Undercity maybe correlates a little bit with her vibing a lot with parts of the villain's plans that could potentially be a problem.
yes,
And the fact that also on the side, she's making one of these glamour copies of herself, which is a practice we kind of learnt from Marisica last arc.
mm,
Like she's also further leading into her vibing with Marisica. Like that's just an extra layer of alarm bells to this whole situation for me. Is she's doing something that Marisica taught us how to do.
Yeah, definitely quite worrying. And that worry is where we leave the chapter.
Yep. Um, I mean, that's pretty much been the theme of these three chapters, right? Is each one has left us on a, oh, that's not a great position that Kenneteer's in.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, but yeah, I really like this ending because Verona actually, like, while she sits next to her doppelganger, she does something that I feel like we've been begging her to do for arcs and arcs, which is she sits here and actually actively asks herself questions about what she's wanting to do, like considering aspects of herself. Like, as much as the doppelganger was a red flag to me, it was her sitting next to it raised a bunch of green ones as well, because she's thinking, oh, I need to fix my mask, but to do that, I do need to sort of
Yeah,
fix myself, and that kind of means figuring out what I want myself to be. And like, you know,
yeah,
like that is like the leap of logic we've been wanting her to do for so long. So, like, alongside that worry, I also can't help but be relieved that she is also simultaneously using this space to surround herself with people like Tashlet and Pekasnot and start asking herself these questions. And
yeah,
I'm much more willing to look past the doppelganger stuff to an extent, because it is giving her the space to make some of the progress she's needed to make. Yeah, it's I know I could come to regret saying that, but like, I don't know, I'm worried for her, but like, just compared sitting next to Lucy in 14.2, I'm just nowhere near as worried for Verona. I think she's
yes, I
doing
agree.
some shady stuff, but she seems in general to be moving in the right direction.
Yeah, she feels like she's a bit more on her path, which is nice.
Yeah, yeah. Without other
Not just kind of
priorities.
spiraling.
Yeah,
Yeah,
without other priorities conflicting, she finally has that freedom to like, think about this stuff, which is like, that's just always sort of been her whole thing. Like, she gets a bit overloaded and, you know, deprioritizes that other stuff, and now she can prioritize it.
yeah,
So yeah, um, I mean, to actually leap back to Lucy, it is worth pointing out, in amongst all of this stuff, like, Verona does talk about how she doesn't quite like process this sort of trauma normally. Like, she thinks, oh, you know, it sort of hit me, but I don't quite realize how it's affected me till later, and blah blah blah. And I very much relate to that whole vibe. But
yeah,
it leads her to think, oh, so I'm kind of avoiding Lucy because I don't want to worry Lucy when she realizes that, like, I'm dealing with this in a different way. And like, reading that, I was very much like, Verona, I understand what you're saying, but that is the stupidest shit I've ever heard, because you know that not like avoiding Lucy is going to make Lucy worry 10 times harder. Like, you are smarter than that. This is absolutely her just like justifying not wanting to confront that aspect of it, and confront like Lucy about it. Like, it's a bit more avoidance, I'd argue. Like, she's sort of justifying why she's avoiding Lucy in a way that I don't think adds up if she really let herself think about it.
yeah. Yeah, no, I think so.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah. Like, what are we expecting next? I don't know. I don't know where we're at. Like,
Yeah. I mean, we're
there's
entering a
so
whole
much
new.
going on.
Yeah, like each of
Yeah,
these three chapters, we've sort of had one from each Kenneteer this arc, and it feels like each one has been, this
starting to set
is,
up some of the
yeah,
beats. Yeah,
this is where we're going. One for each Kenneteer, but also reintroducing where all of our other characters are at, or in Avery's case, introducing our new characters.
yeah,
But these have very much felt like the opening chapters in the next, like, oh, I can't use the term arc because that means something else in this story, but you know what I mean? Like, they're all entering the
yeah.
next
The next
stage.
third of the story. Yeah.
I'm giving up on speculating on the length of Pale at this point. Like, fuck, I've been wrong too many times.
Can't be done. Yeah.
Um,
Nobody knows. It could
but
end
like,
next chapter. It could end in a million years. Who knows?
yeah, like this, I feel like I'd be surprised if we've got like less than, you know, 3 or 4 arcs, but I'm done
Yeah.
speculating whether it's 4 or 8 or 12 at this point. Like,
All right.
I'm out. But like, yeah, each one of these three chapters has very much been like, yeah, this is Avery's next step in her journey. She's back alone-ish in a new place, having to fit in socially again. Let's see how equipped she is now. You know, Verona is trying to figure out who she is. Lucy is struggling with trauma and not having a support network because she always is the support network. Like, super logical next steps for who they were at the start of the story, which is why this feels like Walbo obviously talked about how he considered taking a break and doing another short serial in between Summer Break and Fallout. And I can see that because you could kind of sell this as a very strong, like, this is Pale 2, almost.
Yeah, 100%.
Or like if this was getting published and the publishers were willing to print 1 billion pages, the first 13 arcs would be book 1 and this is book 2.
Well, it probably wouldn't. It would be more like the Summer Break would be the end of book 3, moving into book 4 or something, right?
Yeah, however you want to break it up. But like this is, the biggest
There's a
transition
clear
we've
divide
had.
between, yeah, exactly.
Like arc 8 would have been the biggest one before now, and this one is significantly bigger. And yeah, I can't wait to sort of see. Yeah, the last 3 chapters have opened up so many threads that we're going to be tracking in this new segment. Yeah, I'm interested actually. Well, now that we've got chat, like who people are like the most worried about or the least worried about out of the Kenneteers. And you can't just say all of them. Getting in before that answer.
That's a good question.
Or like what threads they're keenest to explore, because there's so much potential heading into
there's a lot going on for sure.
The rest of the story here. Interesting. So
we got to vote for Verona.
Most worried about Verona, because that's usually me, but I'm 100% team Lucy.
Yeah, me too.
For the person I'm worried about.
Scared for Lucy here. Lucy has gone through some pretty rough stuff.
I think Verona's ripe to make mistakes, but the fact that she's thinking about things the right way for once kind of give me hope that those mistakes won't be as awful as I used to believe they would be.
I think everyone's the least worried about Avery, which is nice.
Yeah, Avery's funny because she, it's so obvious for her character arc that putting her in another new place and making her fit in a place where everyone isn't like sworn to help her is sort of obviously the extent. But I think we all just have, she's just killed it so much in arc 13 that all of us are kind of like, yeah, she'll be fine. And she won't. Yeah. Like, it's going to be rough. Like,
well, she'll have conflict, of course, because she's in this story.
Well, and like her only friend so far is a dude who's mates with Mossa and is a self-professed puppeteer. So like obviously,
God. That's who I'm most worried about is the Darkfall trapper who seemingly lures and eats children.
Like, there's a lot to be concerned about there, but I guess we just have hope that like Avery has, I think out of the 3 Kenneteers, by far grown the most, and I think that's why a lot of us are just sort of like, it'll be tough, but she can handle it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of worried about Matthews. He's not officially a Kenneteer yet, but like obviously, yes, Matthew is in a bad spot.
100%. Shall we dive into some Pale predictions, Elliot?
Yeah, let's do it. What have you got for us?
I've put out a prediction from Lapsed Classicist, of course.
Of course.
Predictor numero uno.
For people, I guess spoilers for the reflecting thing that isn't released while we're recording this. That is a joke that will mean more to people listening to this on the feed.
But yeah, so Lapsed Classicist says Verona will keep making these glamour puppet doubles and Mariska will end up hijacking one, and because it was Verona doing the hard work of building it up, it won't be as obviously fake as the other times Mariska has made human doubles, which I just think is a very fun prediction. Very, just like I can see it.
Sorry, yeah, because the thing that has gotten them through those every time in the past is somebody has figured out that they're one of the doubles. Here, we'll know it's one of the doubles, so that's not the trick. That's not the trick, though. We'll be like, oh, that's one of the doubles. But Verona made that. Like, we are expecting one of the doubles.
Yeah, and that's why it's going to be so juicy. And even, like, Mariska potentially even showing them how to make a double just so Verona can do this. Like,
Seeding
shit,
the idea.
It fits. Yeah.
Because I guess that's one of the things, right, like, with Fairy here is I get the vibe that Mariska's plot has played out. And I think she might still pop into the story, but, like, I do kind of get the impression that she has told the story she wants to tell, and anything else for her will be like a bit more improv, like wasn't really the important part of the story.
Yes.
But also she's a fairy, so that could just be a trap I'm falling into, like.
But even just like, setting up things like showing Verona how to make doubles,
Yeah.
incidentally, even if that's not something that Mariska wants to be there to have it pay off. Like,
Well,
you can kind of feel that being a very fair
yeah.
thread to set up.
Well, this is the thing, right? They don't always like Machiavellian plan things out 10 years in
No,
advance.
yes.
She plants seeds everywhere. Like like this is why I love comparing the fairy to Wildbow, because this is how he writes too. He
Hmm.
like he plans a lot of stuff, but he also like does himself favors by just throwing seeds all over the ground and giving himself room to grow them. And
Yeah.
that's like, so this could absolutely be something that Marisica will just be like, oh yeah, I could see Verona copying that, and I could use that this way.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah.
I've pulled out a
Um.
prediction from Iden Dorr,
Mm.
uh, who is focusing on a quote. So there was a moment between Lucy and Grandfather, which we didn't really call out, where Grandfather brought up that the Kennet others are trying to more actively involve themselves in the town, and they call out the moment where the Kennetiers tried to pull out the fifth version of Ken, or the fifth component of Ken, who was the other part, and it failed.
Mm.
And what Grandfather hints at here is that the others in town are now more actively trying to involve themselves in the town, so that maybe something like that could happen. And Idendor is basically speculating that we know Liz cannot copy others, so as the others become a more important part of town, is that something like that they can use to weaken her hold on the town? Because they can say she
Mm.
can't, like she doesn't, and she can't accurately reflect the town if she doesn't have that other component of her. Which, yeah, I don't know. I mean, to kind of spin off this prediction, what if she gains a component of herself? Because like, if her role as the spirit of the town takes precedence, maybe she will gain something that reflects the others in the town, which maybe will be a new side of her that is more compassionate or something.
Mm. Yeah. I do like this prediction. It's a very fun thread to pull out, and
Yeah.
it presents an option to, I don't know, to yeah, get rid of Liz. But like, I don't
Also,
know. I
I
I
almost
feel like this story. Mm.
I almost prefer the idea of, rather than getting rid of her, what if it like is about turning her? I don't know.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about like I don't know, for Charles and Liz. I don't know that. I mean, maybe we can. Kenneth can exist without Ken, right? Like Kenneth did exist without Ken, and Kenneth can exist without Liz. I think that's fine. But I don't see the resolution to the story being them like killing or dethroning Liz slash Charles. I just feel like
Yeah. So we are, and we have
it
we have
doesn't.
actually we have just had that question from Wildbow, which is, where do you
Yeah,
foresee
true.
the story going? Which we did talk about a lot in our reflecting episode as well. But I mean,
Mm.
the TLDR is we don't really have any super confident guesses, I don't think, which is
Yeah,
part of
but
why I'm
I
loving
don't
this.
think it's going to be. You mentioned the idea of, do you think the end of this story is going to be them dethroning Charles? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Like I think
Yeah.
I think it is more going to have to be, how do we, I don't know, like Charles has made an opportunity to potentially steer towards a better system. How can we do that while not,
Yeah.
I don't, legitimizing him too much or whatever, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I was talking about earlier in the episode. With like, rather than defeating him, it might be more about co-opting what he started.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
a final conflict that is less about beating your opponent and more just like taking their hands off the wheel so you can put yours on them. Um,
yeah,
like that would be my best guess at this point, but I'm not putting
mm,
money on it. You know, like
yeah,
part of why I'm enjoying Arc 14 so much right now is I don't know what the end game is. I can pick out points, like I think Avery's going to go back to the promenade, or deal with the wolf. I think we're going to have to deal with Muss's mates who are going to come for Kenneth. Like I can pick out little things, but I don't know what the end game is anymore with too much of a
mm,
concrete sort of confidence.
mm, yeah.
I love that.
Well, that's it's time to wrap up, I suppose.
Yeah.
Remember, we are still running a discussion question currently, which is, if summer break had been the end of the story, what's the most important thing you would have needed from the epilogues? So make sure you leave your answers to that discussion question in our discussion thread, which you can find linked in the show notes down below.
Yes, we're also available, for reviewing on Apple
Mm.
Podcasts, Stitcher. basically, I think most podcast platforms at this point let you review us, and usually, if you do that, that means more people find us, which means more people find Pale, which is what we all want. This is, we're all part of Wildbow's pyramid scheme to get people to read his stories. So
Yeah.
support the cause.
I will give an example of that, which is I, I've every so often I will post on the D&D behind the screen subreddit, which is a subreddit for like D&D DMs or GMs. To people will post like monsters they've created or like items and stuff, and they'll have threads about like, hey, post a cool item or post a cool monster. I've started posting things inspired by Pale. I posted a thing which was a traveler's coin, which was inspired by the coins that
Yeah.
Avery has now as a finder. And I got a comment saying, "Oh, this sounds really cool. You've inspired me to read Pale," which I was like, "Yes, I did it." So it's everyone's goal to be a part of the Warbow Pyramid scheme.
Yeah. I will quickly say though as well, so a change we did make on all those podcasting platforms is Deep Impact has been available as its own
Oh
podcast
yes.
feed for a while, and so what we did this week was actually remove those episodes from the Pale Reflections feed because we heard from a number of people that it was really confusing to figure out where to start Pale Reflections. So Deep Impact is now fully separate if you are listening to that on your own. Also, if you're on Google Play, I'm sorry, but Google Play doesn't want us to have Deep Impact as Google Play hates us. I don't know why Google Play hates us, but they do. Deep Impact is not on there. It will be soon, hopefully, if Google ever gets back to us. But if you listen to Deep Impact, I'd suggest going somewhere else because Google Play will not let you.
Yeah, don't know why, but that's life. If you want, you can also follow us on Twitter, where you can find news about the show as well as hilarious tweets every so often.
Yep, there's a new live read schedule as well. So if you follow my live reads on Twitter, check the Doof Media calendar to figure out when I'm doing those now.
And of course, make sure you check out the Doof website, doofmedia.com, because there's all kinds of great shows that you can check out on there as well.
Yeah, I think a couple of days after this episode releases on the feed, we will have our next episode of The High Ground,
Yes.
which for people using the public feed will be on Pirates of the Caribbean 2. But for those of you who are patrons, we're going to be talking about Shrek 2.
Yes, if you're not aware, patrons get access to these episodes 6 months in advance. So you have 6 months worth of episodes to binge through. If you want to become a patron, you can do that by going to patreon.com/doofmedia.
Yes, which I need to sit down and watch Shrek later today. Oh, Shrek 2. This will be my first time seeing it, really. So
That's so
looking
crazy.
forward to it.
I'm so excited to hear your thoughts on it. While you're on Patreon, make sure you check out Wildbow's Patreon as well at patreon.com/wildbow. Because, of course, he has created these stories that we enjoy reading and discussing and chatting about.
Yep. I'm trying to think of some Undercity joke we can do here. Like, just make sure you give him money, not toilet paper.
Yep.
Doesn't
I think he does accept toilet paper through Patreon now.
We can't confirm whether Wildbow accepts cigarettes and toilet paper as currency, but you can find out at patreon.com/Wildbow.
Yeah, all the info is there, so make sure you go and check it out. And I suppose that's the end of our show.
See ya.
Bye.